Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Kapiolani Community College. My name is Carol Hosko, and I'm the Dean of Community and Continuing Education here. We are very honored to be hosting this workshop, Bridging Language Barriers, Interpreting for Your Community, which is actually sponsored by the UH Manoa National Resource Centers. They're paying for the workshop and they're paying for the presenter and all the associated costs. We actually have been partnering with them for at least 2 years on this community interpreting initiative that we're doing. And we're really, really happy about that. And we look forward to even more engagement with one another. So I'm going to be shameless here and do a little bit of talking for just a moment about Kapiolani Community College's interpreting program. So, as all of you know, of course, Hawaii is a very multiculturally diverse state. And according to the 2020 census, 19.3% of our population is foreign born, with 88.5% of those being from Asia and Oceania. And I also learned that 1 household out of 4 has people speaking at home in a language other than English. So a majority of those individuals have limited English proficiency. And what I've learned is, the term that's used is LEP. So if you hear that term today, limited English proficiency is what is meant. Unfortunately, a lot of the people have a lot of difficulties gaining access to services that they're entitled to have access to. And even though there is a law, we find that there's still problems with them gaining access in all different industry sectors, whether it be courts or whether it's in health, social services, education, and the like. So last year, there was a concurrent resolution that went through the Hawaii State Legislature, and basically it was Resolution 71, and they were directing the Department of Health to conduct, surveys, to pull focus groups together to find out, why is this a problem still? And why is it still a problem? Who's providing services? What do you recommend that we should do so we can help do a better job of what we're supposed to be doing? So that report was drafted up after a lot of people came together and talked, and surveys were put out and responded to. And I don't know yet, if something's going to emerge from the legislature, but hopefully, there might be some funding or backing to help with more training. But at Kapiolani Community College, we actually were fortunate enough to access some funding that the University of Hawaii Community Colleges got, called Good Jobs Hawaii. You may have heard about that training. It focused on industry sectors, and with the help of Sue Zhang and others, we put a proposal together and went in and said, hey, interpreting is also very important. So we were able to get some funding. And since 2022, we actually have been offering some community interpreting classes in health. We've been offering court interpreting and fundamentals of interpreting. And we are going to be offering a train the trainer for people who already provide interpreting services and who would like to teach other people how to interpret. And then we're going to develop a new industry-specific curriculum for social services. So as I said, I'm not ashamed of bragging for us, but that's not what today is about. Today is about the workshop that is sponsored by UH Manoa and our very, very special guest speaker. And I am going to point out a couple of people who came from UH Manoa, Joan Pond, the National Resources Center, and Dr. Foley, where are you? There she is back there. And is there another one? Terry Skillman is coming tomorrow. But may I ask you to please introduce our speaker?
On behalf of the speaker. All right, so I'm going to introduce Miss Alice Wong. She's also a personal friend. And Alice is a business manager of interpreting and translation services at UC San Francisco, where she's been the business manager for 6 years, but she's been a medical interpreter since 2008. And she's certified in Cantonese by the Certification Commission for Healthcare Interpreters in California, and is also qualified to interpret in Mandarin. She received her bachelor's degree in Asian Studies with her certificate in Chinese from UH Manoa, and she was awarded Interpreter of the Year of 2014 by California Healthcare Interpreting Association. Thank you, Alice.
Everyone, can you hear me? Because I'm trying to speak louder. Again, my name is Alice. I'm very grateful to be here to come back home to share my experiences with everybody as a medical interpreter. First of all, let's do a quick icebreaker. I love food. I like to eat. And so it's the afternoon, right? So good afternoon. And what did you guys all have lunch today? So what did you guys all have? Introduce each other to your neighbors in the front and the back. Let your neighbors know what did you have, and I'd love to know what you all have. I can tell you, I had a musubi today. That's what I had for lunch.
Oh, you're still alive. I'm so
Hey, I guess lunch is a good topic, isn't it? All right, so just really quick. Anybody want to share what they had for lunch? I had some musubi.
I can share what I did kind of.
Oh no, what do you have?
No, I only eat once a day, so I will be eating after this.
Oh,
Yeah, I'll be
okay.
having my Korean meal on Wednesdays, so I haven't planned it out. Yeah, I'll eat, yeah, Young Seafood on South King Street, if you're interested, really good. I am not advertising. I'm just saying.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I actually had a Slido, but I'm not sure why it's not showing up. It's this little survey. Just wanted to maybe a show of hands since it's not quite working how I like to be. Anybody speak another language other than English? Not surprising, right? But you know, this is a workshop for interpreting. Great. Can you tell me what language you speak?
Spanish.
Spanish. Awesome. Okay. What else? Portuguese. Portuguese. Oh, great. Anyone else?
Japanese.
Japanese. Cool. Who else?
Mandarin Chinese.
Mandarin Chinese?
Of dialects.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I think you're my classmate at some point. Angela. Angie, okay. Maybe we, I'm not sure, you look familiar.
Number one.
Okay,
Yes, I
great. Great, well, thank you for sharing. Just kind of want to know, like, the folks in the room, the languages you know. Right. Oh, is it not sharing? Here we go. So some quick objectives for today, we're gonna talk about. Monty, does it look okay on your side?
I'm seeing your next slide.
Are you seeing this slide?
No,
Oh,
it's sandwiches.
oh, yes. See something else? Just see this one.
There we go.
Okay, you're seeing the right slide now?
Yes.
I think
Now it's back to sandwiches. Now it's good.
Sorry, guys. Okay, okay. So these are the things I'm gonna be talking about today. First, if you allow me, I'm gonna share how I got into medical interpreting. And then we'll get to why we provide language access, code of ethics and standards for a medical interpreter. The skills of a medical interpreter. Interpreters at work, where do we work? Where are we? And also the path to certification, and then a little something I want to share at the end. It's called Do It Anyway. So how did I get into medical interpreting? Actually, it starts with my background. You get asked a question a lot of times. Well, I do. Where are you from? I guess it depends on what are you talking about, right? The conversation in, the concept you're in. It could be where you're born or where you grew up, right? So for me, today I was tell you I'm from Hawaii and I was born in Hong Kong. So I was born in Hong Kong, when it was still a British colony. And does anybody know what the handover of Hong Kong was? Oh, great, yay! Yes, 1997. So I moved away from Hong Kong before that. A lot of families back then moved away because they were uncertain what's going to happen, right? They moved to Canada, they moved to Australia, they moved to the US. For me, our family didn't move away because of that. It's because my dad's work. We moved over to England. And that's when my parents realized, you know what? I have a younger brother. The kids are not going to be able to learn fully Cantonese and how to read and write because we're in a foreign country, right? To keep that up is really difficult. But my parents felt that, you know what, it's still important to hold on to your culture and hold on to your language. So at home, we spoke Cantonese. And my mom did impart to us some simple classical poems that I guess most kids at our age would know about. And so we learned to recite them, we learned to write them. And one thing that's really nice is that maybe Angie will know, if you recite the multiplication table in Cantonese, it's really easy. It just sounds like you're singing with us, and you remember it really well. And so those are the things my parents thought were important, that you have to continue to speak the language. And also, another thing is that you need to learn to write your name in Chinese. Why? Well, it's also who you are, right? And many parents, take a long time to come up with a good name for their child. It's usually a name that, holds a lot of hopes and aspirations for the child. And you want to respect your parents, right? And so we said, just gotta learn how to write your name. And eventually we moved to Hawaii. And that was in the 3rd grade. And I went to Ka'iolani Elementary School in Kalihi. And that was where I had my first little experience with something like interpreting, but not really. So what was that? So there was a kid in school who had just come from China. I remember his name was Yang. And at that time, oh, you speak Chinese? Oh, he speaks Chinese too. So the teacher's like, can you help this child, this student, and let him know what's going on? And I'm like, I'm 8 years old. So I was like, okay. But I realized that Young doesn't speak Cantonese. He speaks something else. Even to this day, I don't know what he speaks. But, I tried to help him as best I can, right? And somehow he understood what I was saying, and I was able to relate to teacher what he was saying. And so, it's not quite what you think of interpreting, but as a kid, you just pass me from what did he say? What did she say? So, how many of you have done that as a kid, right? For your parents or for your friends, even, right? Just to say, oh, what did he say? Tell them, and tell them, I'm okay, right? So that's kind of start of interpreting, right? A little bit of experience of passing, communicating to different languages. And so. And so at this point, I'm still, I'm 8 years old, and I'm like, okay, my parents still want me to learn, the poems and things, but then, how do you keep that interest? You're a kid. You're not gonna want to learn something classical all the time, right? So how did I continue my language skills? Well, I have great cousins. They live in Hong Kong. All the cartoons that we have in Hong Kong are dubbed into Cantonese. And these are Japanese cartoons, right? And some of you might recognize. They're all dubbed in Cantonese. And so my cousin would send it to us in VHS tapes. Anybody know what VHS tapes are? Hopefully. Yeah, they're these like tapes look like this. You put it into VCR and it plays. Not before DVDs, right? And so that's what kept an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old interested in continuing to speak Cantonese and to learn about their culture. Through media, right? All these media things. And what else? We have music, right? And these cassette tapes. Anybody remember cassette tapes? So if you flip this over, this box, this label, there's lyrics. And so as a kid, I was interested in language. So I would listen and I would kind of look at the words or the characters. But I don't know what they are. But I'm like, oh, this is fun. Just take a look, right? But all of this really is how do you keep up with culture and with language, right? Because when you're just speaking with your family, you're very limited in your vocabulary, right? How do you learn more vocabulary within different settings? And so being able to, watch movies, watch all these other things, learn about the culture itself outside of what the family tells you is so important for us. So afterwards, I'm thinking about, I don't feel like I belong at some point in school, right? Not belong meaning I have this culture that I have at home, right? That I speak Cantonese, I know all these things. But then how do I bring that to when I'm with my friends, right? With my classmates? It's like I feel like I don't belong here, I don't belong there. Where do I belong? And I also had this feeling I want to learn more about language. I want to learn more about just, the writing and the reading. Well, in Hawaii, I think high school, you have to take a second language, right? You take a second language. A lot of my friends said, oh, I'm going to speak Spanish. I'm going to speak Japanese. Japanese is the most popular one. But for me, I was like, what do I want to do? I want to learn something different. Something that's close to me. And so one day, I would try and tell my parents, we're having dim sum. And there's a girl across the way. She looks about my age, 14, and she's reading a newspaper in Chinese. And I'm like, that is what I want to do. Be able to read that newspaper. Because of all the movies I watch, I want to learn about what the celebrities are doing. I want to know about the gossip. But in Canada, you don't know how to read it. So I decided to, okay, let me look up which public high school in Hawaii offers Mandarin, because that was the closest. There's no Cantonese, right? But Mandarin, it's an ends to a means, right, for me to learn to read it right. And so anybody know which high school offered Mandarin? Yes, McKinley. That's right, McKinley. And that's actually outside my district. So I had to go there and state my case. Why did I want to go to McKinley High School? I don't know if this is stereotype, but when I made my case, the principal was like, great, okay, we'll take you. But you need to, you have to take, what did you say? Something like, you have to be part of the math club. And this is a kind of a stereotype. Asian kids are good at math. And guess what? I'm not one of those. I nod my head and, because I really wanted to take this class. So that's what I did. I went to McKinley and I took Mandarin. A way in NC means, right, to learn how to read and write. And I learned traditional characters. And so, remember the feeling I said I didn't know where I belong, right? Like neither here or there. So later on, I learned something called the third culture kid. Anybody heard of this term? Yeah. So this term, I thought it was something new because one of my cousins told me about it. I thought it was some new modern term, but actually it's not. It's actually from the 1960s, coined by Dr. Ruth Hill. Let's see. Originally, it was to define the kids, expatriate kids who live, in a country other than where their parents are from. And it's where, they have their culture of their parents and the culture of where they're from. Where they reside. So they're living in these two different cultures, right? But they're kind of in between. They know both of them, but they're not totally either one or the other. So these kids live in this middle space. And so they coin it as the third culture. And when I read this, I'm like, that's me. That's how I feel, right? And it's a struggle for some of us to feel that way. But, that's why all this, like, trying to study the language, watch all these shows and things. But you know what it really is, now that I'm an interpreter? It's a superpower, right? Because as an interpreter, you have to learn how to move between different cultures. You have to know how to navigate, not just the culture of countries, but the culture of the medical setting, right? Healthcare, right? You have to know that culture as well. Because people coming from other countries to the States, they may not understand the health culture here, right? Something very simple. I've heard it from my patients. The doctors will say, okay, you have these options. A, B, and C treatment. What would you, what are your thoughts, right? They'll ask the patient that. And the patient's like, why is the doctor asking me? Aren't they the authority? They should tell me what I need to do. Right? So there's a difference in culture, right? Understanding, like, in their culture, in their country, the authority are the doctors. You do what the doctors tell you to do, right? But in America, we want to include the patients, right, in that conversation. And so that's very different. And so that's something that, as an interpreter, you see that as medical interpreter, sometimes you have to advocate and say, hey, interpreter would like to, pause here and explain a little bit why the patient might be looking lost or kind of frustrated, why are you asking me for what I want to do, right? So it's a superpower because you're able to understand, this is where I need to do a little bit of advocacy to help the patient know what's going on. Right, so bear with me a little bit more. So continue to build my foundation. I went to university here at UH. I kind of I want to continue to learn about my heritage and culture. I majored in Asian studies and a certificate in Chinese. And when you're a university student, I think most of you at some point wondering, where am I going? Right, as a university student, what skills I'm learning here that apply to the real world, right? Everybody kind of has that feeling. And so I thought back to, okay, what did I really enjoy doing? I enjoy language. I enjoyed those little experiences where I helped my classmates when I was younger. And I also enjoyed hearing the stories from my mom. My mom was in the Red Cross when she was at Hong Kong. She told a lot of stories about helping others. Less fortunate, right? Helping those in need. And I thought, you know what? Maybe interpreting is something I want to really go into to help others, right? With the language barrier. And so I took courses from Sue back there. And those courses kind of was the foundation for me to go into interpreting. So in what fields can you find interpreters? In the community, where in the community can we find interpreters? Healthcare, that's me, right? What I do. What else? Any ideas? Where?
Or,
Sorry?
or,
Yes, port. Yes, port. Where else can we find that community interpreters? So port.
schools.
Schools, yes, IEPs, right? Those plans, right? And then we have maybe social services and also the government, right? So healthcare, social service, legal and education schools. There's also in entertainment and sports. You don't really think about it, but think about it, right? You have athletes coming from different countries, and they will need an interpreter, some of them, right? And business, right? And IT. Conferences, UN is it's a huge one. We have all these interpreters on headsets, simultaneous interpreting. Those are really hard. And you have diplomacy and government, right? Now, as an interpreter, if we do our jobs well, you don't hear about us, right? And so when I first started thinking about interpreting, how do I get into this field? We don't hear about interpreters. You hear about doctors and lawyers, right? Engineers, right? We don't hear about us if we're doing well. But I do want to share a few stories that we did make the news. We made the news where? Have you heard of Shohei Ohtani? Shohei Ohtani, not the greatest thing, right? The interpreter was in gambling front, not what we want to be in the news for. But it happens. Another one is, do you remember in 2013 what happened at Nelson Mandela's memorial? You remember? So at Nelson Mandela's memorial, there was a sign language interpreter on the stage who was not signing her. It was just fake signing. And people were so upset, especially the deaf community. They were like, this person is just doing nothing. They're not signing anything at all. And it was a big deal. Like, who hired this person? This is Nelson Mandela, right? Like, all these leaders coming to give their respect to Nelson Mandela at his memorial. And this person is signing nothing that is true, that is correct, right? So you do hear about us, not the good stuff, right? So terrible stuff. But you do hear also sometimes in good places. So, do you remember the name of this one? So a good example is in 2021 in the US-China summit in Alaska. I don't know if you guys remember. It was on the news for a little bit. I think it was probably a bigger deal in China than it was here in the US. But basically, one of the diplomats from China gave a 16-minute speech, did not stop for the interpreter. And usually, when you're at a summit, you do kind of have to pause and have people interpret. Unless you're in a conference where you do simultaneous, then people just keep talking. So what did this diplomat do? He talks for 16 minutes. He turns to his colleagues and says, anything else to add? And that's when the interpreter interjects and says, excuse me, interpreter needs to interpret before anything more happens. So this interpreter, her name is Zhang Jing, I think, and she did a brilliant job according to the news. Like she rendered that 16-minute speech beautifully. And what I thought was funny is that the US side saw that and says, you better give her a raise. She did such a good job. And also, be that diplomat person, he himself was an interpreter many years ago. So why would you, do that to your colleague, right? But the point is, if you do your job well, you don't hear too much about this. And what do you mean by doing the job well is that you communicating, you're helping these two different parties communicate almost seamlessly, like they're just talking to each other. So that's a good one. Right. So a little bit more about where I got to where I am. Can you tell from this slide where I started my interpreting gig, my first one? Sports. Yes. Unexpectedly sports. After university, I went to Beijing. I went to Peking University. I continued my studies there. That was a real test because learning Mandarin in Hawaii, I thought I was really good. When I got to China, I was like, what are they saying? I've learned this language for so long. What are they saying? Remember, when you're in a classroom, the teachers speak standard Mandarin, very clear for you to understand, right? And they're bilingual, they'll teach you, they'll speak in English with you. But when you're in China, all the professors have their own accents. They're from different areas in China. And sometimes it's so thick, you cannot hear what they're saying. And so that was a real test, right, of my language skills. Did I learn all these 8-10 years? Like, I can't understand a thing. So what did I do? I went back to, watching TV. Turned on the TV with the news on, doing my chores in my little apartment, and listening, just listening. Because I felt they were talking so fast. But as I'm doing my chores, doing other things, I listen and then listen. It seems like they were slowing down. Seems like they were slowing down. And you're like, oh, I caught that. I caught that sentence, right? What they're saying. And so another skill, like, you learn in school about in interpreting, you have to listen. Even in language, you have to listen, have to practice that skill. And one of the biggest tests for me, besides going to university there and trying to struggle and understand what they're saying, is communicating with someone in Mandarin. Not that I don't know how to speak it, it's because the person speaking it with me, or sometimes the accent is so heavy, I get a little bit afraid. So a really small story. A light bulb in my apartment blew out. There's a lady in the elevator. There's an elevator lady back then. Someone that pressed a button for you. You don't press your own buttons. Someone presses it for you. It's not a very big building. But that lady has such a heavy accent, and I always feel like she's very rough. But the light bulb went out. I have to make myself able to speak to her and understand what she's trying to tell me about how to fix this. For me, it's a very big test because I'm very shy. Right now, talking to you is like I am trying to keep my cool. My teacher there knows that. And so I had to force myself to go out, talk to the lady in the elevator, and try my very best to understand what she's telling me and how to get this fixed. And because you think about it, if you're in a foreign country, unless you're in school, buying something at a store, you don't need to particularly say anything. You just pay and you leave, right? You don't really interact unless you have to make yourself interact. And so that's my first time, okay, I gotta do this. And when I did it, it was like, oh, it's not that bad. I can do this. Anyway, so that's the time when I was in university trying to continue my skills. So at that university, I also was able to do, not to do it at university, but through some other contacts, I became a tutor for athletes, for Olympic athletes. And that's how I also became an interpreter for an athlete in, oops. No. Oh my God. Oh my God. In sports. Anybody know a sports called 9-ball? 9-ball, you know?
It's like red balls.
That's billiards, but close. So 9-ball, there's no 9-ball, there's only 8-ball. So 9-ball is race to 9. Basically, there's only 9 balls on the pool table, and you have to crack it, right? And then the first person to put all the balls, the ninth ball in, wins. It's, yeah, I know. I didn't know until I became an interpreter for this one athlete. She was a world ranking in this sport in China. But in the US, unless you start from the bottom, they don't recognize your world ranking. So I was hired to be her interpreter and bring her to the States. And this was a very interesting job for me. Because I had to wear many hats in this job. I was an interpreter, I was an English teacher, I was her manager, I was coordinating her trip to the States. So, and you have to interact with the associations in the US, right? You know, getting her there, talking to people, helping her interpret, you know, what she's saying. It was a lot, but I learned a lot too. I learned that this was not what I want to do. Although I love to travel, this is not the traveling that was right for me. It could be right for other people, right? But it was not the one that's right for me. And I learned that quite quickly. And when she was there, like I said, the US didn't recognize the world rankings. So she started from the bottom up. So even though she's ranking the third, we had to go into little towns in Texas, in Florida, and she had to play. And because she was already world ranking, I was kind of scared that people think we're hustling. Because when you go into a little pool hall, she blew everybody out of the water, right? Because she's just trying to get to national to play, you know, the competition. And so, you know, it's quite an experience as a young person, you know, and definitely, you know, helping her interpret between the association and what she's trying to say, and you got the news going. It was a lot. And again, I realized this life is not for me. And around this time, another job kind of came about for technology, right? There was a group of students coming from a Singapore university to come to the States to go to California, to go to Silicon Valley and learn about semiconductors and all these things. There were a lot of them were actually entrepreneurs. So, you know, I took on this job and I was like, okay, I gotta study all these terms, right? That might come. And it turns out when I studied, nothing that I studied was talked about. It was so hard to prepare for this because I don't think the university folks who brought them over were prepared that you needed an interpreter. And so it was a struggle. And I realized I don't want to talk, I realized again, not the right fit. I don't want to talk about semiconductors. How am I helping people when I talk about semiconductors? So around the same time, a good friend of mine that I made in Beijing from California, I was like, hey, I'm doing medical interpreting now in San Francisco. And she's telling me how great it is, all these things. And I was, you know what? That might be it. Because, you know, all my life I loved helping, you know, my people, and also, you know, my mom's stories about helping folks who are less fortunate. Maybe this is what I'm gonna do. And so I moved to California. Why? Because there's more opportunities in California, in the Bay Area, for healthcare interpreting for cancers and before I play this, so I had to, you know, I moved to California. I learned medical terminology at a community college. I did medical transcription as well, just to study those terms. But you're studying it only in English, right? So I had to do my own study. What are they in Chinese? Right? What are they in I had to look them up online, cross-reference, make sure the terms are correct. And when I got my hands on a Chinese English dictionary, medical dictionary, that was gold. That was gold to get that dictionary. But still have to learn terms, right? Because in the medical field, there's always going to be new advancements, right, in health. And so you have to always be learning different terms, different things are going on that you might need. So that's how I got into medical interpreting. I went to California. I did all this, you know, self-training, self-study, taking the medical terms. And with what I learned at UH in my translation and interpreting courses, it was a very good foundation that UCSF was able to hire me to be a medical interpreter. And their test was grueling, a 2-hour language competency test. You had to do, had to write, had to translate paragraphs. You have to do consecutive interpreting. It was 2 hours, it was very long. But you know, it was all worth it because at the end, when I started medical interpreting, I had a really good mentor and became a really good friend of mine. She was before she was a nurse and she became a nurse. And that, you know, when you do medical interpreting, I realized this is where I found my joy. There's always going to be good and bad in medical interpreting. You're going to interpret, you know, good news to people, to your patients, but also sometimes it's going to be bad news as well. There's a balance, right? But I realized this is where I belong. This is what I want to do medical interpreting, to help folks in this way. Because without the interpreter at these very crucial moments for a patient, think about that, right? They won't be able to make informed decisions about their healthcare. And sometimes it's life or death, right? So now I'm gonna play this little clip, tell you about it. If you've been paying attention to what I've been saying, you might get this. Let's see if I know how to do this.
Sergeant Kelly, can you please stop the vehicle? Excuse me? I need to speak to you, Sergeant. We don't stop the vehicles, we keep moving. I think we have a problem. Please stop the vehicle, Sergeant. Stop the truck, Jesse.
All vehicles are tactical stop.
What is it, Ahmed?
Something's wrong. There's no logical reason for Hadi to lead us down this route, unless
Unless what?
he's leading us into a trap.
Well, that's a pretty big assumption, Ahmed.
Deduction, not assumption.
Now you teaching me English?
I've been thinking about all the possible reasons why he'd take this route. All the answers smell bad. He lied about the road being washed out. The rainfalls didn't affect this area.
Hadi's been vetted.
You can say whatever you want, Sergeant. We just don't want to go down this road.
You're out of your bounds, Ahmed. You're here to translate.
Actually, I'm here to interpret.
Okay. So basically, I forgot to give a little intro to this. So this movie is called The Covenant, and it's about a interpreter named Ahmed and a Master Sergeant, John Kinley, I think. So it talks about their journey, like, you know, they say that the interpreter saves his, you know, the Master Sergeant, and he goes back to the US and he's fine, but then the interpreter gets in trouble because he helped him. And so he goes back on his own to save the interpreter. But basically what I want to show is when he says, you're here to translate. That's what John Kinley was saying. But the interpreter says, no, I'm here to interpret. So there's a difference between the two. And if you take away nothing from what I say today, please remember the difference between these two things. Interpreter versus translator. An interpreter is an individual who orally interprets from one language into another. Or maybe sign language, right? Without sign language interpreters. But a translator is someone who translates written material from one language into another. I hear this all the time, and you know, when I'm at work. Oh, I need a translator. But what they really mean is an interpreter. And we also see this in the news sometimes, like English articles. They also, like, you know, switch these two terms around. But there's a difference, guys. There's a difference. And a little bit more about what the differences are, right? So you interpret from one source language in real time. You have to have strong speaking and listening skills, and you have to manage the flow of a visit. Like for medical interpreting, the flow of a visit. A translator is translating materials from one source language into another, right? And you have to have strong writing skills in both these languages. And you have to do a lot of research too. Because, you know, you have to make sure what you're translating and writing is correct, right? And usually a translator works with another person to kind of proofread and make sure that it's okay too. Actually, in fact, interpreters also do some research too, because you want to make sure before you walk into an appointment that you know the terms that the doctors might be using, right? And sometimes you have to look it up. You do. But yeah, ours is a lot of time on the fly though. While translators, they can have a little bit more room to do more research on what they're looking at. So what is the difference again between the two? You guys can tell me? What does an interpreter do?
Real time.
Oral translation, yes. And what does a translator do? Written, yay! Okay, all right. I'll give you one more bonus. Use versus work with. I need to use an interpreter. Can I order one? Did you use an interpreter that day? The doctor used an interpreter. You see anything wrong with this? Anybody see anything wrong with these 3 sentences? No?
I mean, we wouldn't say, can I order one more? Like, I request one.
Yeah, okay, yep, that's one, yep. You need to work with an interpreter, not use an interpreter. Use is use a tool, right? You wouldn't say, I need to use a social worker, or I need to use a doctor, or I need to use a nurse. You wouldn't say that, right? I'm a person too. An interpreter is a person too. So we need to, so as interpreters, we need to remember, we also need to recognize we are a profession, right? We're not a tool, we don't come from a vending machine. A lot of people think we come from a vending machine, or we're on roller skates and we can get to an appointment like this. It doesn't happen. So a doctor uses a scalpel. A doctor works with an interpreter. That's very important. It's important for as interpreters to remind ourselves too, right? Because when I started off, I didn't know the difference either. I was like, well, it's fine. But then a friend was like, no, Alice, you're not a tool. You're not to be used. Somebody need to work with you, because we're part of the care team, right? And to be part of the care team, we have to be seen as a professional, as a person, right? And so remember this. We might have a test of that. All right. Next, we're gonna go into why do we need language access? Why do we need that at all? So, before I go into that, I know all of you here speak at least a second language, right? And this video I'm going to show is about someone who speaks English in an environment that no one else speaks English. So this is really just to put ourselves in the shoes of a person who is, like Carol said earlier, limited English on question. But this is kind of the flip of it. And this was provided by Texas Association of Healthcare Interpreting from Texas, like almost 15 years ago. Please play.
Doctor on Albertillo. That's Tandoro.
Excuse me, sir. I'm so sorry. Look, she's been crying nonstop. She has a temperature of 105. I don't know what to do.
Marabidig. Vi paroles
No,
lasant.
please, just every time I feed her, she throws up. I don't know.
Vi paroles
I don't understand what you're
lasant.
saying. What are you saying? Can you just look at her? No, she's burning up. Just feel.
Faju paroles la anglan.
No, what? She's burning up. Feel her head.
Tranquilli kananje. The mother is Askan.
What is he doing?
Do you have?
My baby, she's got a temperature of 105. Every time I feed her, she throws up. Please, can you?
She's
She's burning up. Feel her head.
Morabidig.
Please, just feel her head. Feel her head. Just someone let me in to see the doctor. No, does anyone understand what I'm saying? Please, someone help me.
8% of U.S. citizens speak limited English. For these 25 million Americans, professional interpreters can mean the difference between life and death.
Kind of, kind of heavy, isn't it? But if you think about patients who are limited English proficient, this is similar to what happens to them. Not, it may not maybe only a baby, but not understanding what is being said around you is really challenging. Very, very challenging. Actually, if anybody caught what language those folks were speaking of? No? It's actually a made-up language called Esperanto. It was created in 1887.
Yeah, Poland.
Yeah, and I think it incorporated like all different like European languages, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they were hoping that this would be the international language and everybody was going to use. Obviously, that didn't happen, but they were trying. Right. So why do we have to provide language access? First and foremost, it is the right thing to do, right? We want to help our fellow community members, right, neighbors and friends. But also, we do have laws and regulations to that says that we need to provide this service to kind of guide us how to provide it. So first, we're going to talk about Title VI. So Title VI says that it prohibits against exclusion of participation in denial of benefits of and discrimination under federally assisted programs on ground of race, color, and national origin. And national origin is where language falls. And that's why we must provide this service under this Civil Rights Act. And it's for any program that receives federal assistance that needs to provide this service. So this is a little bit more about it requires that federal financial assistance to reasonable steps to make their program services accessible by eligible persons with limited English proficiency. That's one of the laws and regulations why we need to provide language access. And we also have the American with Disabilities Act, ADA. That's for our sign language folks, for the deaf community and the hard of hearing. So it's a Civil Rights Act that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in everyday activities, and in all these areas right here. And communication is definitely one of them. And so, we need to provide interpreters, real-time captioning, telecommunications, video relay, and video remote interpreter. So interpreters, we have sign language interpreters. That's probably the one that we know about the most. But there's also tactile interpreters. There's also tactile interpreters, right? And then there's real-time captioning, which I guess nowadays we do. There's a lot of captioning, right, going around, but this is real time. So someone is typing as they're signing, yeah, as the person is talking. And then we have telecommunication relay service that's free for the deaf community. There's also video relay that's free as well, and the video interpreting is fee-based. So most healthcare centers, like at UCSF, we use video relay. The video remote interpreting. There are some criteria for video remote interpreting. It has to be meaningful access, meaning the screen has to be big enough. The connection has to be good, that the picture and the audio is clear. Because when you do sign language, there's like this part of the body you have to see. So it has to be clear enough for the patients and providers to see the treatment that's happening. And we also have the Affordable Care Act, Section 1557. There was some final rulings on it last year. I'm trying to go a little bit quicker. So this is non-discriminatory law with the Affordable Care Act. It builds on all these existing civil rights. It is also the first civil rights law that prohibits sex discrimination in healthcare, including sexual orientation, gender, identity, sex stereotype, and sexual characteristics, including intersex individuals. So this is a large, Affordable Care Act is quite large, and so 5057 it talks particularly about language access. I'll go into that a bit. So again, this applies to any place that receives federal funding, any place, right? And so that kind of helps guide healthcare centers what they need to do. Again, you have to take reasonable steps to provide meaningful access to language, language access. It has to be free of charge for patients at these places. And they also must post signage and put it on the website that language access is available in those particular. When you walk into a hospital, have you ever seen those signs? Ever noticed them? Right? You see those signs. Usually it's like there's also the rights and responsibilities of patients in different languages. But also there should be a specific sign that says, you know, we have language access provided in the various languages. This is a big one. Minors are not to interpret. Except when there's no interpreter available at that time, at that specific moment, and it's life-threatening that you can probably get the assistance of a minor, but that is actually, you cannot rely on a minor to do interpret. First of all, you do not ask a child, you cannot think about having a child interpret something that is about your health and is very personal, your own child. There's a conflict of interest and is biased as well. And the child may not know any of the terms the doctors are taught. So that's a lot of stress on the child. And that shouldn't be on them at all. And there's definitions about what a qualified interpreter is. You notice that it's a qualified and not certified, because not every language can be certified, right? And so it's qualified interpreter or translator. And then let's see. And then machine translation. Anybody use Google Translate? Yeah, okay. Right, okay. Now, they also have a section on that. If you must use a machine translation, you need to have a qualified translator to review what was translated through Google Translate or ChatGPT. Why? Because mistakes can happen, right? And let me show you what those mistakes might be. I know some folks might read Chinese and you'll find this interesting, and some I have it translated. This is a real life example. The top part here is discharge instructions, okay? And the people who can read Chinese, first of all, there's two things that's wrong here. The Chinese they're providing here, this is colloquial Cantonese. We do not write this way. We speak this way, but we do not write this way. And the worst of all is this, what I highlight here. What does it say here? Inability to drink enough to urinate at least 4 times daily. The folks here can read Chinese. Can you tell me what it says? You don't have to, but if you want. Let me just show you. What this sentence here says is this.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah. It's very different, right, from what's in English, right? And that's because no one took the time to ask a translator what it said. They just thought Google Translate could do the job. So not good. And we actually had to do a whole investigation on this because this was sent to a patient. And I'm pretty sure the family who read it will know they should do this, but at the same time, this is not what we want our patients to read. Another one, context. So this is about punching in and out your time card, clocking in and out with your badge, right? So someone put it through Google Translate, says, hey, Alice and team, can you make sure this is right? Sure, we'll go and review it. And we put it through Google Translate, great. And so here it says, you have no missing punches. So you chimed in, you clocked in, right? But here, our friends who can read Chinese, what does it say?
It says that you didn't miss any, like, real punches.
A literal punch.
Yeah.
You didn't miss any, literally a punch. Right? So context is very important. And then that's why you need a translator to review any work you put through machine translation. But if you do know both languages, it is helpful. If you yourself is a translator, right? It is helpful because it helps you back translate and make sure what you wrote, if you put it back in, would it come back to English correctly? It is helpful. So machine translation is not all bad, but you have to have a good command of both languages in order to use this correctly. All right. So last thing here is national class standards. So national class standards is a guidance, right? All those laws that I just showed you, it helps you kind of, how do we implement all of these laws that around language access? So we have the culturally and linguistically appropriate services class. There are 15 standards, and there are 4 themes. These are the 4 themes. And each one, and we're a little bit short. Oops. So each one kind of helps the medical, like for me and the medical center, it helps us to guide us. Okay, what do we need to do? We need to have policies, right, around language access. We need to have people in our leadership and workforce who understands linguistically and culturally our the folks in the community. So hiring people who understand those needs, right? And then communication and access and language access assistance. So many people know how to access the service, right? Do you call interpreting service and let them know? What is the way to actually access and request the interpreter, right? And also, having those signs posted, right? That we have language access available. Engagement, continuous improvement, and accountability. So at UCSF, we continually have to improve our services. Our folks, our patients know how to access us. Does providers know how to access us? What changed? What can we do? So one example is in our medical health record system, we put a hard stop, meaning you have to document you worked with an interpreter. You can't bypass that in the outpatient setting. In the past, we would just document, some people don't, some providers forget to document that they worked with an interpreter. Why do we need to know this? I know this might be a little bit in the weeds, but Joint Commission will want to know, how did you provide language access to that patient who speaks Spanish? Did you work with an interpreter? Was it over video? Or maybe your provider was a certified bilingual and they could do that. They want to know how you provide that access, right? So one of the things we did was put a hard stop saying, how did you provide that language access? Where you work with an interpreter. That way we have a documentation that yes, someone, that patient received language access through which means. I know there's a new executive order, right, about English being our language, and it's a big deal right now. And all I want to say is that Title 6 is Section 1557 is still remained a law. There's no changes to that. You can't overturn these things with an executive order. So we still have to follow this. And to tell you the truth, personally, even if they got rid of all of this, we still want to help the folks in our community, right? Even without these laws, we want to be, good neighbors and help our our fellow human beings, right? All right. Okay, I know you guys are getting tired, but so there's a small exercise. Everybody get up. Stand up. All right. There's something called fair share. It should be fun. You're gonna find a partner. You're gonna share what stood out to you. All these things that Alice just talked about. Too many things she talked about, but which stand out to you? What you learned that was new, maybe an aha moment for you. But the point is, besides sharing, you're gonna mimic each other's poses. Either you're gonna do some stretches, so so if Carol and Susie pair together, you could do some stretches as you're talking, or like maybe a yoga pose if you know what I mean. So just just do some stretches, right? Because you're sitting for too long. So share some things with each other, what you thought was interesting that you learned, and just move about. Move about. All right, go. You got 2 minutes. Alright. Okay, that is so. That was nice, wasn't it? Getting up, just moving a little bit. We're gonna go into a break, so before we do that, just wanted to hear. What did you guys talk about? Anything you learned that you didn't know before? Yes.
So I just mentioned to her that where I work at Crete, and when they asked me to help translate, interpret, they said, can you translate instead of saying interpret?
Yep. Now you can gently remind them. Yes. Oh, thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
Sorry,
No worries.
I didn't know live captioning was a thing,
Yes.
so my question is brought up the case for the Cantonese. So there was a case when someone has to do live captioning, would they live caption in vernacular? Or would they use like the Mandarin
Oh,
reading
good question.
format?
Yeah, so usually live captioning is for the deaf community, and maybe there's that person is, a Cantonese deaf person. That's a good question.
We had that a couple months ago, and someone reports, I tried to interpret, he was never answering. I'm like, well, how come he's not answering? It ended up he was deaf, but as an adult, so he didn't know any sign language. So what we did is that we postponed it, and then we used Zoom. And we just had the ability to speak into a Zoom thing with a big screen in front of them. So as she's simultaneously interpreting it, the Cantonese thing, it was very good.
Yep.
So it just all came out.
Yep.
Zoom, we just thought of anything, thinking out of the box, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Sue. Yep, that's one way to do it. Yeah. And so, I think captioning has come a long way. Now you could just, is speech to text, right?
Yeah.
So, as long as it's accurate in the text, I think that's a great example. Thank you. Yeah. So I know it's been tiring, so let's take a 10-minute break. Yeah, so back in how was it? 2:30?
Restrooms, if you need them, are to the right, and down the hall to the right. Basically right behind this room. Everybody got that?
Sorry.
Yes. Hi, Thelma. Nice to meet you.
Thank you for the warehouse.
Restrooms to the right, Thank you. So after this, I think.
Yeah, thanks.
People. I'm thinking. How we go down.
But it's only because.
That was it. Cool. Sorry. Oh, probably not. Oh, okay. If they want a photo of the organizer, you can make one. You take a name tag. Unless you want it as a photo, but no, yeah. Just started my sister. Yeah. 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 Yeah, I don't have it, so much sense. And last minute. Yeah. So that's why. Yeah, it was.
This poor duck is like, oh, fortune lost. All right. I hope that was a good break. Seems like you were.
It's a really good break. Really refreshing. Thank you. Oh, I'm really curious about your UCSF.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, so that's the organization I work for. So I work at UCSF Health. I'm gonna talk a little bit about that in
Great,
just a
thank
bit.
you.
Yeah, of course, yeah. All right, hope that was a good break. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about medical interpreter and their code of ethics. Oh, this is not the thing. Code of ethics and standards practiced for the medical interpreter. So this is what we follow as medical interpreters about our code of ethics and standards. Earlier, you remember one of the slides that in the Affordable Care Act 1557, you know, the qualified interpreter translator follows a certain, you know, common ethics and standards, and this is the one. It's a lot, so I'm just trying to go over a little bit faster. Right, so National Code of Ethics for Interpreters in Healthcare was published in 2004 by the National Council of Interpreting in Healthcare. This is a place where we all reference a lot. When we look for, you know, our ethics and our policies and things like that. And then in September 2005, that's when the National Standards of Practice in Health for Interpreters in Healthcare came out. So all of this is really it's guidance for the medical interpreter when they're at work. And if you're already an interpreter, these are something that's very familiar to you. So in the code of ethics, you know, the interpreter treats everything with confidentiality, from working with the care team and their patients, everything is confidential. And we also strive to render the message accurately without any additions or omissions. Now, it doesn't mean that, you know, it's always gonna be one-to-one, right, from one language to another. Sometimes you have to find a way to say the same thing and the same meaning, but you may not be using exactly the same words, right? Because each language have their differences. And so it's also taking consideration of cultural context as well. I think the most difficult when it comes to this is jokes and idioms. Those are you guys are nodding. Those are the hardest ones. Like, how do you interpret jokes? Because providers want to feel a rapport with, develop a rapport with their patients, right? We can feel like comfortable and closer, and they may turn and look, oh, this is easy peasy. Oh my gosh, this is easy, right? So you have to, what is there an equivalent in my target line, in my language for that, right? It may not be easy peasy, but it might be something similar, right? So when we say, you know, you render it accurately and in the spirit of the original message. So we tell we kind of tell our providers, you can use these things, but just be careful when you do. Let me give you an example. This is a Spanish example. I'm gonna try to remember what my colleague said. Everybody knows Sesame Street. We have Big Bird. Big Bird is yellow, right? Big Bird is yellow. So one of my colleagues, a Spanish interpreter, went into a room for a PEDS patient. Before they went in, they had to wear a gown, the PPE gown. What color is the gown? Yellow, right? So the doctor's taking time to put it on, and so is the interpreter. And they walk in and the doctor says, oh, I'm so sorry, it took so long, you know, I had to put this gown on and I look like Big Bird, right? So this is a Spanish speaking family. And anybody know is there a Big Bird in Spanish? Anybody know?
There it is.
So Big Bird, what I heard from my coworker is that Big Bird has a cousin. And the cousin and that Big Bird is, I think it was green. It's a different color, right? Is it green? Green. It's green. And so the child was like, or the family was like, Big Bird. So there was a little bit of, you know, like difference there, right? And so the interpreter had to interpret and says, well, Big Bird in, you know, in our culture is not yellow. He has a cousin, you know, a friend or a cousin that is green. And so, but you know, even with that, even though they had to explain the joke, right? It was still a way for them to come closer to the patient, right? That even that little misunderstanding was a little bit of a fun, right, for that child. And so, yeah, it's always all these like jokes that is a little bit difficult, but it's not impossible. And you know, the interpreter tries to maintain impartiality, information counseling, and advising on projecting for some of the basics of purpose. So this is sometimes not easy to do, right? Because you want to help people, but you have to remain impartial. So, example I have is when you're in a outpatient setting, sometimes all the seats are taken up in the waiting area. We also try not to sit with our patients. We want to kind of keep that professional distance, but sometimes it can be helped. And so, because the patients know they're going to interpret them, they trust you because you speak their language. That's one of the things that happens. Because, oh, this interpreter speaks my language, and sometimes they bring out a bunch of papers out. What are their bills? They're helpless. It's like, where do I pay them? What do I do? And you can certainly help them to a degree, right? You can tell them, you know what? Maybe after the visit, I'll walk with you to the billing place and let me help you interpret. If you have the time to interpret, let me go there with you and help you interpret. If you avoid giving them any, you know, counseling, but oh yeah, you need to go here to pay it. No. You go with them to the financial billing area if you have the time and interpret that conversation for them with that person, right, with the billing section. Because you don't want to impose your ideas on how these things work, right? Because maybe there's some sort of nuance you don't know about, right? Because you're just looking at a bill. Maybe there's something else going on that the patient doesn't know, but they need to get that. and also to remain that, to have the, your professional boundaries, refrain from getting, too involved. Some patients are like, oh, let me give my phone number so I can contact you next time. Let's avoid that, because you don't want to have, then because then it becomes a conflict of interest, right? You might become too close to your friends, and it's, you want to avoid biases, because what if we don't interpret for our families or for our friends, because you might insert biases without even knowing, right? Because if it's your loved one and it's something serious, even though you're an interpreter, you might be like, oh my gosh, I'm about to tell my loved one this serious diagnosis. That's really hard on yourself, right? It's really hard on yourself. So it's always, even a manager, I don't interpret for my mom. Unless like there was no one there and you really need to get this appointment started. I've done that. I admit I've done that. But that's because there was no interpreter there, right? And I have to keep myself so focused on, this is not my job. This is just another patient. So we do it best possible, avoid doing that. Avoid interpreting for your family, right? Because you want to have that professional role. You only have to be in a professional role. It's hard to wear that hat, right? And we also, you also have to develop that awareness. Like, what things I'm doing, is it right? Do I understand what's going on in the conversation? So as an interpreter, you're wearing actually many hats when you interpret. You're not just doing one language to the other. In your mind, you're thinking about, do I need did that patient understand? Was that visual cue that I need to pay attention to? That was something, wait, was that cultural? Like, do I need to step in and advocate? A lot of things are going through your mind actually as you're interpreting. Even though to everybody outside, you're just saying one, interpreting one language to another. But in your brain, you're actually doing a lot of thinking. Like you sometimes even you don't realize it. You treat everybody with respect, right? And advocating is something we do, but at minimum, if possible. And you advocate if there's some sort of misunderstanding, or it contains the patient's health or well-being that needs to be said. Something needs to be said. And we're always learning. We're always learning new terms, right? In the medical profession, there's always some new advancement, right? Some immunotherapy that's going on, obviously, right? So we have to learn those terms, right? And keep up with those terms. One of the things that I do is I go to the annual conference in California. It's California Healthcare Interpreting Association, CHIA. So every year they have a conference. It's either in Northern California, it's in San Francisco, or they do it in LA. And so these are the places where you gather as medical interpreters and you learn new things that's happening, right? And a lot of interpreters share their knowledge through those conferences. And we have trainers and instructors who come and provide us with that information. And it's also a way to keep up with our certification. If you're certified, you need to keep up with your CEUs. You have to renew your certification every 4 or 5 years. So those are the places where you can get together with your colleagues, your peers, and learn something new and get your credits. And of course, we need to be a professional and act in an ethical manner. And all of that, actually, if you look at, so this is the code of ethics, right? So if you look at it, it's very similar to the national standards of practice, right? You have to be accurate, confidentiality, impartiality, respect, cultural awareness, boundaries. So this is, kind of all boiled down to, these are the things we need to, the skills we need to know, the knowledge we need to know to be medical. Cultural awareness is definitely a big one. Like I said earlier, it's not just a culture between two different geographical places. It's also the healthcare culture as well. There's this one that it's a little bit of a culture. It does have to do with culture, but also just frustration to a patient. But if a patient has to go to different specialties, the first thing they ask the intake from the medical assistant is, "Oh, what medicines are you taking?" Sometimes the patient puts out a list, right? Or they take all their bottles with them. and they put it down, and you have to look at each one. Now, if the patient has maybe 2 appointments in the same day, right? So let's say diabetes, ask them, what are the medicines you're taking? Take it out, show it to them, appointment's done. But now they go to a second appointment, right? The same day, and maybe it's cardiology. And what happens? They ask the same question. What medicines are you taking? This sometimes, I don't think it only happens to patients with LEP, language and English proficiency, but maybe to all of us. Why are they asking me the same question? I just saw diabetes, and it's in the same, let's say, it's in this at UCSF. It's the same system. Why are they asking these questions? Right? Patients are frustrated. And so what do? We have to, and the doctor doesn't know why. And so you have to advocate. So you know what? Interpreter wants to take a pause and explain some things to the patient. And what you explain is that you just went to diabetes, but maybe they prescribe medicine to you, new medicine to you. Maybe it's not on the record yet. And so that's why the cardiologist has to ask, right? Because they want to make sure the records are correct. But patients may not think that way, right? It's a safety mechanism to check, right, if the medicines are so. And so that's also, you have to explain that because the patient's just getting more and more frustrated every time. I hear that when I'm sitting in the lobby with them. Every time you ask me the same medicine. And I'm like, well, let's talk to the doctor, and then let the doctor explain why they have to keep asking the same questions. Another cultural awareness is I remember I was at Peds, and it was for nutrition. So the toddler wasn't thriving. And so they said, put butter or oil on your rice. And the mom looked at doctor like, what? What? And I had to explain, we don't usually put, butter on our rice or butter on our broccoli. We don't do that. And so, then it's dependent on the provider to do a workaround. Okay, what are the foods that you usually eat, right? And how can we put more calories to that food? And so cake is the best thing. Everybody loves cake, right? And the kids are like, yes, like a cake. But they try to be more nutritious and figure out ways, right? So food is a big thing, right, for our culture. And so making sure that the doctors understand that is really important. And not just, I'm putting butter on my broccoli. That is not how I eat my broccoli. So, that cultural awareness, to bring that to the doctors to understand, that's important. Right. So now we'll talk about, the framework of, how an interpreter works, the framework that an interpreter works in. Let's talk about the skills of a medical interpreter. I'm going to talk a little bit more, and then I'm going to invite Yuka and Melody to join me in just a little bit. All right. So there are actually 3 types of interpreting. There's consecutive, simultaneous, and sight translation. I talked a little about the first 2 during my talk earlier. Anybody know the difference? What is this consecutive and what is simultaneous?
I understand. Consecutive. One person's talking for 60 minutes or so.
Hopefully not.
That they stop at some point, the message is interpreted or however long, whereas simultaneous is happening at the same time with movement.
Right. Yes. Usually we don't go on for 16 minutes. But consecutive, you're right. It's usually what is ideal is that providers talk for maybe 2 to 3 sentences, and then they pause, and then the interpreter interprets what is said, and maybe the patient has a response, and you interpret that goes back right into English. Now, typically at any one time, an interpreter can have about 3 ideas in their head. as they're interpreting. Note taking is very important for us, right? Knowing shorthand, how to take notes. So that's consecutive interpreting. So there's you let the provider speak, there's a pause, interpreter interprets, and then when the patient speaks, there's pause, interpret, and then go back to that. Simultaneous as, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. I know you.
Oh, Brandon.
Brendan?
Yes, Brandon.
Yes, so Brendan was saying simultaneous is at the same, in real time, the same time. That's very true. So simultaneous can be usually at a conference. Nowadays we have Zoom, right? Conferences, you have a headset, you're hearing what's going on outside in the conference and you're interpreting. You work with a buddy, you work with a partner. And usually you switch off every 30 minutes or so. And when you do that switch off, it's not like, oh, now I'm gonna rest. No, you have to be, you still have to make sure that your partner who's now interpreting is getting everything right, you know, and like kind of, you know, make sure that what's going on is okay. So you don't really, you rest, but not really. Nowadays you have Zoom, and Zoom has a lovely thing, as Sue was saying earlier, this interpretation through Zoom. And so what at UCSF, we have a lot of webinars that happen for our staff and also for our patients. And so we can have at most I think now we have maybe 4 languages at the same time in the same Zoom, different languages. And so our interpreter goes into a channel in Zoom, and the attendee who speaks, let's say, Spanish will hear only Spanish. So what happens is the voice of the speaker, of the presentation is a little bit lowered, and all you and the patient, the attendee will hear the Spanish coming through their channel. So as long as you select the right channel, you can hear the interpreter. So we have interpreters who do that at UCSF. So that's very popular now to do it through Zoom. And now we have sight translation. So sight translation is something is written in English, and you have to interpret into Spanish, Cantonese, Mandarin, Japanese, whatever it is, as you're reading it in English. What's coming out of your mouth is going to be the target language. So that's sight translation. This is don't use it very often. At least I haven't.
Some situations like a patient getting out of the hospital, discharged, notice.
Yeah, and that's a tough one because sometimes those instructions are really long, right? So we try to keep this to minimum at best. Nowadays we want to translate those discharge instructions, but you know, it's also always about timing, right? When the patient gets discharged at noon and you get the project at 9, you know, to make sure you have enough time. But that's what sight translation is. You have a piece of paper and you just translate. I've done that. I think it was at the ER, and it was in Chinese, and it was all these intake from you know, because I remember I had that, but I was reading it, and the doctor said, "Oh yeah, that sounds like an intake form to me." I'm like, "Okay, great." So you know, it's it happens, but not that often. Mostly in the medical setting, you do a lot of consecutive interpreting. Simultaneous, it does happen once in a while if you're in a visit where you have patient family who speaks English, and then you have the patient. And the family is like, I just want to talk to the doctor. And you have to, usually you do consecutive, but they're so like, I just want to. And so you do a little bit of compromise. So you know what? I'll do simultaneous with the patient, and you and the doctor talk. Because this way, the patient will still understand what's going on. Because one of the main things, the golden rule in medical interpreting is everything that happens in the room gets interpreted. Everybody knows what's happening, right? So side conversations, I'm gonna have to interpret that. Even though you're not talking to the patient, I have to interpret that. So that's why we have to tell the providers, anything you say will be interpreted. So tell that to the patient and the doctor. Because think about it. For us, we understand English, we walk into a room, maybe there's a bunch of doctors, and you're only paying attention to the provider who's talking to you, and maybe there's some side chatter on the side. You don't, you don't care because unconsciously, you're probably hearing it, but you're like, it doesn't pertain to me. I'm just gonna focus on what the doctor requires happening, right? But if you're a patient with LEP, you don't know that. You don't know if this kind of conversation over there is about you or not, right? Because you don't understand what they're saying. And so the interpreter's job is to interpret everything that happens in the room. So it's equitable, right? So that's why we tell people, let's keep any of these conversations, if anyone go outside, you need to have those conversations because everything gets interpreted. Yeah. And so all those things I talk about are ethics and standards. I can actually all boils down to this. What is the role? We are contact information, right? No omissions, no additions or change the meaning. We maintain the same content, tone, and linguistic register. We're cultural brokers, providing cultural context, right? So everybody understands each other. And we are communication managers. We need to manage the flow of that visit with the doctor and the patient and maintain transparency. When I say the speed and flow is, what if you have someone who's talking for 16 minutes, right? You have to stop and hey, you know, interpreter needs to put in a pause, right? Because you can't remember everything, right? As even as an interpreter. So you have to control that flow, right? Sometimes there's many doctors are talking over each other. You have to maintain that flow. Say, excuse me, interpreter needs to, you know, let everybody know that please one person at a time. Yes.
I have a question about that. So how often do you all meet with doctors and nurses to help remind them of that etiquette, that the consecutive etiquette, or is it something they just learn on their job, like they messed up, or at school? Like when does that conversation happen?
Good question. Good question. So at UCSF, we medical students do have courses on language access, so how to work with an interpreter, and so we're part of that. So I think we have it in the first year. We have like a presentation, something similar to this, where we explain our services, right? How to work with an interpreter. What are the best practices, right? One basic thing is we use the I statement. You know, like I speak as if I am the patient. I don't feel well today, right? And so the doctor needs to understand. The doctor can't say, oh, Alice, can you ask the patient how are they feeling today? No, I tell them, you know, doctor, please speak directly to the patient, right? Saying, hi, Mrs. Chan, how are you feeling today? Right. So these are the basics that we teach our med students. And then in the second year, we also have a practicum, where we're on a Zoom, where everyone's on a Zoom basis, that basically they practice with us as interpreters how to talk to how to speak with patients. So there's a standard patient, so almost like an actor who's bilingual, and so they're the patient, and there's a med student, right? And so they talk to each other, and we do the interpreting. And so they learn how to keep their flow, right? Not to run on for too long, as you know, when they're doing these things. This is a role play, basically, as they learn these skills while they're medical students. And then when we have residents coming in, because UCSF is academic a center, right? We have doctors and residents and fellows, med students. We also give them the in-service. We teach them about, hey, these are the best practices when you work. Thank you for that question. All right. You guys want to come up? We're going to talk a little bit about the skills, right? So earlier we talked about cultural awareness. So definitely you need to know 2 languages fluently. Medical knowledge, right? The interpreting skills, which is the most important kind of your basic foundation. Excellent communication skills, memory skills, that's important too. And there's self-care and note-taking. And so we'd love to hear from some of our speakers. All right. Oh. Sure.
Like a small.
So thank you for to be here today.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perhaps everyone can introduce themselves. Maybe we start with Sue.
Sure. Hi, I'm Sue Zhang. I'm a Mandarin interpreter. I also have been teaching interpreting skills. That's where we know each other a long time ago. At UH and now through KCC continuing education program. So we have programs for everybody. I see a couple of my students in the class. So welcome to come to the show. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Melody Kubel, and I am the manager of the court interpreter program for the Hawaii State Judiciary. So we recruit the interpreters for legal settings. Go ahead.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Yuka Nakatsuji. I'm a Japanese English interpreter from Helping Hands Hawaii, and my section department is a bilingual access line. And I've been doing the interpretation since 2007. Phew, that's a long time. But anyway, so I touches with the court interpreter to the medical interpreter. Of course, the community interpreter is so much in deep. I mean, you think of any places, you name it, I've been there and I've been doing the interpretation. So
Thank you. So she's my sweet colleague. We both work at Helping Hands Hawaii. And well, I actually prepare a short bio. Should I just say it?
go for it.
Okay, so loving to help people is like my second nature because I'm from Taiwan, so this is like part of being a Taiwanese. And in college, I majored in German and German language culture. And I also learned Japanese at that time. And I'm most fond of like psycholinguistics and paralinguistics, so that's what my study at Harvard. And I also are very interested in the advancement in sciences, and also my other side of me is a very quiet and very introverted person. I like my study in classical Chinese novels and poetry. And I have a degree, MA degree in linguistics from Harvard. And that's why I also taught at UH Manoa and also here before. And in Taiwan, I used to work as a lecturer of English as a foreign language for 12 years. And over there, I also did simultaneous interpretation for international meetings, mostly academic meetings. Since I liked sciences very much, so I did a lot of scientific kind of interpretation at that time. And I also did a lot of research papers, translation. So that really helped me with interpretation at the same time. And over here, I've been doing the interpretation since 2015, and kind of like Yuka, I've been almost everywhere. Like HPD, you like to go to HPD. That's some places that we've been to all the time. And then also like students with ADHD or psychological problems, behavioral issues. We also go to like an office nearby here to do the interpretation. And then also some social services, more like victim and witness programs that we also have to go in. And then there are also some other ones that are really interesting are actually the traffic accidents. So we help the insurance companies and their insured people to help them interpret. Sometimes we also have to bring in legal issues, like the lawyers will come in to join us. So those are also very interesting. So and also all in all kinds of medical issues I also did before. So it's been very fun for almost 10 years here in Hawaii.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's fun.
Thank you for your introductions. And I have to say, Taiwanese people are really helpful.
Oh, yeah.
I was in Taiwan and I got lost and they're like, oh, are you okay? Do you need help?
Yeah, we will take you
Yes.
all the way to where you have to be.
Phones didn't work. I have cell phone. I said, oh, let me lend you, where do you need to call? Oh my goodness. So thank you for sharing. So I think this I just kind of wanted to, now that we talked about, the skills of, managing introvert, we have all these underlying skills are the same, right? But what are the differences though? Like when you're in the settings that you have introverts, like empathy and cultural awareness, I heard is a little bit different, isn't it, Melody?
So in the court setting, the interpreter is really a critical part of our courtroom team because they're central to the being able to provide communication access so that limited English person can understand what's going on in the courtroom, can meaningfully participate in their case, can understand what the judge is telling them to do and comply and get out, right? Court is not a happy place generally. But as an interpreter, that means that because you're part of the courtroom team, you have to be very neutral. So our interpreters cannot be giving legal advice, cannot be chumming up similar to, I think, in the medical setting, you can't be best buds with your person. You don't want to have the appearance of bias or any kind of conflict. And sometimes that is hard because our circles are small in Hawaii. Sometimes communities are small. In certain languages, everybody seems to know everybody or they're related. So it is a challenge, but our interpreters we tell them you really have to kind of check your culture at the door because you can't be the cultural broker in court. You just are a language machine in interpreting what is said into the other language and vice versa. But you can't be explaining to the judge, well, judge, the way that he answered the question is because in our culture, blah, 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 blah. You can't be doing that, right? That's not the appropriate place to do that. So, in a certain sort of way, I think legal interpreting is a little bit easier because you don't have to be thinking, do I need to step in now? Is this part, should I be explaining that? I mean, really, that's not an appropriate place to do that. So our interpreters are just interpreting.
That is very true. Yes. Yeah, but when it comes to the community interpreting, it's a little bit different from the legal aspect per se. Let's say my background is counseling and education. I went to the University of Maryland, College Park. So I didn't go to UH, sorry. But anyway, so that is my strong background. So, when it comes to, let's say I'm going to the IEP and then I am rendering my service to the client, usually the parents and then, I'm at school. So, I had a little bit of knowledge what is IP and then how they're going to conduct at a school. So that was a plus. But, the depth of the terminology that they're going to use, you have to be familiarized in the beginning. And then, sometimes it can be very lengthy the meeting, and then sometimes it's not gonna end right there. And then you need to come back, and then you gotta start it. So you gotta have a lot of stamina, and then you will start. How should I put it? You use a lot of awareness of what's going on because you cannot be the tunnel vision and then you're just doing I'm just gonna be the interpreter and then just interpret, because you have to learn a lot of, cues and okay, this is what's going on. So you have to be very alert and then you have to be on. Otherwise, you're gonna lose not only the translation, but you get stuck and then you don't know where to go next. So that's something that from interpreter. You need to be just train after train and then be familiarized with the terminology. That's the things that I wanted to say to the prospective interpreter, professional interpreter, because once you become the professional, you go through the code of ethics. It's gonna be so important. It's gonna stick with you. You know, whenever you're in doubt, you need to go back to the code of ethics and you have to stick by it because, you know, sometimes there's gonna be the conflict of interest. I guarantee once you become the professional interpreter, there's gonna be the conflict of interest. What do I have to do? I was able to actually consult with my supervisor, and then this is my situation, and then how should I go how should I go about? And then there's gonna be always the, the appropriate advice that you're gonna get. You know, you have to stick with your code of ethics. I mean, that is so important. And like what she shared, you know, we go to HPD, HPD to the Adult Protective Service, sometimes the Child Protective Service. It's a sad story. So you have to keep your mental, stable and check, and then just be healthy because it's gonna be once you become the interpreter, you will encounter. And then, some of the story that you hear, you not only have to keep it confidentiality. You know, you cannot just go and then coconut wireless. You cannot do that. So you have to be tough. You have to keep it to the core. I mean, yeah, that's what I gotta say.
Yeah, I really agree with that conflict of interest, because a few times when I actually knew somebody was my patient, but he actually or she actually ended up having to go to the court with something else, I had to give up that appointment because I couldn't be impartial from that patient. So I had to give it up. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? From medical to court and across the board, if the person you're interpreting for them does not understand, I don't mean the professional, the doctor, the judge, the lawyer, the person you're interpreting for, if they don't understand, can you help them? Can you explain it to them?
When you say they don't understand, you mean jargon wise, language wise?
Language wise.
Either
Or the
terminology
process.
Or directive from the judge or the lawyer or the doctor explains something. And you're kind of looking at them, realizing they're not fully understanding.
Do you mean?
And you go into explanation.
There are actually two different kinds of situations, like what you said. So one is basically the patient or the person understands some English, but very limited. But there's another one is that even after you explain to them from the interpreter, they still don't have the lexicon in their knowledge. So that's very difficult. And at that time, sometimes you just have to give up to try to explain. Like there was just a recent case, a patient actually was, a cancer patient was referred to a endocrinologist doctor. And then when I explained to him what endocrinology is, he couldn't understand. And then the sister was there. I also tried to explain to them, they still couldn't get it. So for that, I just had to stop. I could only say that something to do with your whole body circulation, but it's not about the blood or your nerves. So that's how the only thing I could do better. Yeah. So that's one case.
Yeah, I mean.
So, oh, go ahead. So in court, it's very different, I think, say the judge is using very sophisticated high language. The interpreter has to interpret at the same level of language, the same register. So they can't explain clarify, dumb it down, right? The interpreter's job is not to say, excuse me, Your Honor, he don't understand what you're saying because it's too high. Can you bring it down some to like, make it simple? And similarly, we don't expect our interpreters to be attorneys. So we don't expect that the interpreter knows enough to be able to explain that legal term or that concept, right? So what we are trying to train judges and court staff to do is, if the person looks like they don't understand, is to ask follow-up questions, right? And we also rely on the person to say, huh? I don't understand. What did he say? Because it's self-advocacy, right? If you don't understand, how are you going to comply? And if you don't understand, you had better not be saying, yeah, I get that. Oh, yeah, I understand, because you're going to walk out that courtroom and not know what to do. But our interpreters are not asked to explain anything. We don't want to put that kind of pressure on our interpreters. Our interpreters only interpret what is said. And we rely on the court or the judge to explain themselves or to try, if the person is not getting it. Judges are usually pretty good in Hawaii about trying to explain it a different way or trying to make it a little simpler when they feel like the person is not getting it. But our interpreters are not that person. Yeah. So basically our interpreters are just putting the limited English person on the same footing as the English speaking person in court. So whatever the English speaking person hears, the way they hear it, that's what the interpreter is going to interpret. It's not higher, it's not lower. We don't just simplify anything, right? So and it's true that sometimes people walk out the court, they speak English, they walk out of court and they go, what just happened in there? Like, what am I supposed to do? I don't understand what he said, right? And it happens, yeah. But our obligation is to provide language access to the limited English person. So, but our interpreters, yeah.
So they don't ask you, I didn't understand it, explain it better.
Well, if the person says, if the person says to you, I don't understand, then the interpreter says, I don't understand, right? So the judge can explain it, but the interpreter's not, yeah.
They're in court, they're just nodding, yes, but they don't understand.
The interpreter can't, no. Yeah, no.
I like the part where, Elodie, you said interpreters are expected to be attorneys.
Yes.
Right, it's just like medical interpreters are not expected to be doctors, right? We're not walking dictionaries.
Yeah.
Right, and so it's up to the doctors to explain certain terms, right? You can say, patient doesn't understand, can you explain it a different way? If you see the patient isn't understanding, right, this procedure that's being explained to them. You can advocate that, so, can you explain that differently? Because even if we know how to say it, we don't know what, as interpreters, I don't know that. So it's a doctor's responsibility to explain what this actually is. And so, again, we're not doctors.
We're not the doctor,
Right,
yeah.
we rely on the doctors to explain, and then we are the ones who interpret the patient what is being used. I like that. No, we're not attorneys, no, we're doctors.
Yeah. And that makes your job a lot easier, right?
Yeah.
It takes a lot of pressure off because you're not expected to know all that.
Yeah.
Because that's not your job to explain. Yeah.
So as far as confidentiality, anybody that works with multiple organizations, if y'all have ever had to sign a confidentiality statement at any point? And is it every time you
Every
do that,
time.
or is it like?
And it's in the ethics.
Yeah.
For the ethics.
It's hovering on you.
It's usually with the company who hires you or with the court who hires you. You sign it once.
Yeah.
And then that applies to it.
Yeah, all cases.
Yeah.
Just a question is there like a state board or that oversees interpreters, and someone that you have to go if there's an issue that you face, encounter, that you can kind of report that to state officials or government officials?
There is a State Office of Language Access that was created, OLA. And they are they spearhead all the executive branch language access initiatives. So you can always complain to them. If it is a court-related matter and you have a problem with the either not being provided with an interpreter or not being provided with the right interpreter or having an interpreter who did not do a very good job for you, you can always complain to the court because we have our own program. So we train, test, and classify all of our own interpreters for court. So they can always, email me or call me or whatever. We do have disciplinary rules for the court interpreter program where we can actually run somebody through if they egregiously or repeatedly violate the code of ethics, or they are repeatedly or egregiously not providing good service or whatever. We have a process which is a formal process whereby we can sanction them or even remove them from the program, which we have actually done. But it's very similar to, attorney complaints. Go to the Bar Association. For state court interpreters, you would come to our office. Yeah.
And having said that, I think the Office of Language Access has a complaint form on their website, the State Office of Language Access, so that where anyone can file a complaint about language access they should have had, or whatever happened. But having said that, there has been lawsuits brought by civil rights against certain agencies, and that has changed the agency and how they do things. So there's been lawsuits against the Department of Human Services, created a whole new process after that. Recently, the unemployment office, because of COVID, a lot of people weren't getting language access for their benefits. And so that created a big lawsuit, which has changed the way they're doing things now. And so that has really helped. The lawsuits, I think, have really helped push this language access to, forefront, but it's still happening. Problems are still.
Are you allowed to use visual A1 besides that I was talking about immunotherapy? Immunotherapy is about using your own T cell to activate your immune system, and for your own immune system, you differentiate good cells, bad cells, especially eliminating the inhibitors. But then when you translate it, if the doctor say, explain inhibitor, what that is, the client may not understand. So can you draw? Because you understand what inhibitor is. Can you draw?
You can tell the doctors, may I do this for the patients in order to let them understand better.
The doctor's approval. Yes.
It's better.
I wouldn't do
Yeah.
No, I would never do that.
No,
I would never do that. I would never do that.
you would actually ask the doctor to do it.
Yeah.
The doctor should be drawing those pictures.
What about?
But having said that, I think most of us carry glossaries somehow, like digital glossaries. For example, part of the ear, the other day, they were talking about an ear infection in this tube, station tube or whatever. I happen to have it in Chinese and English on my thing. So I kind of so in the tube, I'm just kind of showing them where it is, and in this two part, you have as we're interpreting, as I'm interpreting whatever the doctor said, not more, not less. But I happen to show it. I think only one time I said, oh, doctor, I have this. And I showed the doctor. He goes, oh, perfect. Here, this is what I'm talking about. And he took my picture and showed it.
So
But
can you utilize your phone by activating your AI helper and then ask the doctor, can I use this to explain?
yeah, I've never done that. ever.
I have never done that.
Maybe let doctor explain that better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's their responsibility.
Because we are interpreter, we're not the
We're not
advocate.
doctors.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have
And I
to-
think you have to be really careful with AI, although it is getting much better, that it may not be 100% accurate, or it may not be the way the doctor wants to explain that particular whatever.
And sometimes the doctor doesn't want to go into that detail and you just hijacked it. And he goes, no, it's not even important. It's not really what I want to talk about. I want to talk about treatment. Okay, the T cells, they're going to go home anyway, and they're going to read it all on the internet. So I never want to spend my time doing that. I only have 20 minutes. I want to talk about this. So interpreter, don't hijack my session. This is my session, not yours. And so sometimes we think we're helping when in fact we might be hurting the session. We have to trust the one in charge. Even though when we leave, we might think, oh my God, that doctor is so, or that lawyer, I would never hire them. I mean, we have a lot of our thoughts, but that's not our job. It really isn't our job now.
I can see there was a lot of which actually happening in the hospital clinics. There are a lot of typical medical terminology.
Absolutely,
that
yes.
They would not understand.
Well, I think when we walk out, I think a lot of interpreters' experience is interpreter, thank you so much for being here, right?
Yes.
Thank you so, so much. This is the first time I've ever understood because they never got an interpreter before, or because they used my daughter, or they used my so-and-so, my relative. But this is a professional interpreter. Thank you so much for being here. And I think that's the experience that a lot of people have.
Oh, they see you guys as their support system.
Yeah,
Well, a lot of times I go in, when I just wait at the doctor's office for the patient, and then the patient come in, the first thing is that, oh, when I see you there, I'm so feeling at peace. I was like,
Yeah.
do I have that kind of ability to make people feeling at peace? And then at the same time, when the patient said that, and I explained to the person at the counter, and then she said the same thing to me. She said, oh, when you're here, not only just the patient, I'm at peace too. I was like, thank you. So it does make a big difference, I bet, for the patients and the offices, the doctor's offices, or wherever they need to be translated.
Like you develop that trust, right, with the patient. You might see them multiple times, right?
Mhm.
Oh, great. It's you again. Great. Sometimes you don't know our name, but oh, it's you. Great. You know, and so it's what brings us joy too, right? To know that someone recognizes us. Because again, if we're interpreting between two parties, sometimes we are invisible, right? Quote unquote invisible. But this helps us, oh, if someone actually recognized the work that I did. Right. So yeah, definitely. Johnny?
No,
So
she's
I
a
had
lady
heard
behind.
about earlier that there was someone who's not here today. I'd like to share a little bit more about it. It's, for example, in certain cultures, the body, you don't delete organs. So if, a doctor asks that, as an interpreter, you may know that culture. So you, and then ask the doctor, can I explain this for no, you don't even explain it to the patient without asking. I think let me take a step. I think it depends on how that conversation is going. Because even though, culturally there might be something there, you don't want to jump to that right away. You want to see where the conversation leads you. Because sometimes maybe the patient is fine with it, right? And maybe they're not and they have some hesitancy. But I think I would first see where the conversation is going before I jump to any the advocate for patient about culture, because even though we have that cultural understanding, we can't generalize it either.
Yeah.
Right, so we need to kind of go with that flow first and see where that conversation is going. You see that, okay, I think this is really something I need to advocate for, because this is something, I think this cultural piece that I know is coming. Then you can, kind of make that call, but usually you kind of want to let that conversation flow the way it's supposed to first before jumping to the, sure. Any thoughts on that?
I have mentioned once, and it happens a lot when the patient dies, and then they have to talk to the family members.
Yeah.
And I know in the Chinese world, they consider, you need the whole body there, every part of it, right, to be buried or whatever you're gonna do, to be whole and complete. So it is a very foreign thing. But I remember during this one time, they probably spent a whole hour talking to the family member and went back and forth. But during the break, I just mentioned, oh, doctor, you may not know that the Chinese feel that, this whole thing. So that I just giving you that piece of information. And it's not to say, okay, forget it, we won't ask, but it's to, okay, so how do we approach it from a different angle?
Right.
And so I think that I just did it during the break. I just said this one thing about that. That's all I ever interfered, I don't know.
But then if the doctor was adamant about, saying it or asking it, then you still will need to translate as it's.
Everything.
Everything. Yeah, that's our code of ethics. Yeah.
I'm curious, what are the highest speed languages that you see in the work?
So in the court, at least our number one language that has been for a few years is Portuguese. Our number two is, I believe, Spanish. Our number three is Marshallese. Our number four is Ilocano. The top four kind of switch around 2, 3, and 4 year by year. But basically statewide, those are our high need languages. Within our top 15, we have Pohnpeian, Kosraean. I mean, Samoan, Tongan. I mean, a lot of the Pacific Islander languages are in our top 15 at the court. And this is based on actual times that we paid an interpreter to be present in a court proceeding. So it's not, the population we see at court is different from maybe the population in the census or what we see in the schools. So we keep our own stats. And we also do it by island because we recognize different islands have different populations. In Hilo, in Third Circuit, in Big Island, the number one language may be Spanish. Or like that. So I think in Kauai, their number one language is Ilocano. So it just depends on your community, but we do have stats. We release them annually. Yeah.
I have stats for it includes court, but thank you for asking the question. And it also includes in the medical. This is mainly medical. Our number one language is the need and the requests that come in is Turkish, the Micronesian languages, and then Korean, and then Mandarin, Japanese, Cantonese. And the Japanese, I'd like to preface by saying that Straub has a lot of their own Japanese interpreters. So this is on top of it. And this is only one business. One company is a language service provider that does this. Doesn't include the one that they work for. And then we have Cantonese, Vietnamese, Ilocano, then Marshallese, Spanish, which is, I think, the number one growing language in Oahu. So Spanish is getting a lot more. Then Tagalog. So, there's Ilocano is a lot higher than Tagalog here in Oahu. Whereas in other places it might be Tagalog. And then we have Samoan, Pohnpeian, Thai, Kosraean, another Micronesian language, Laotian, Russian, Tongan, I'm gonna skip that. This doesn't include sign language. I'll skip that. Arabic, yeah, isn't that interesting? And then Portuguese, Yapese, Cebuano, and this is just going down in terms of, Visayan is a growing language now. Visayan, which is a Filipino language, it's growing a lot. Ukrainian, Mortlakese, which is a type of Turkish, Indonesian, Cambodian, Thai, so Burmese, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I got pages and pages of the various languages that we use. So I printed this out right before I came. Thank you for asking that.
I also asked my office about the last few months, the top 5 languages that are requested. So in March, we have Mandarin as the first one, Korean, and then Vietnamese, Ilocano, Japanese. So these are the top 5 languages in March. And then in January and February, we have Mandarin, Cantonese, Korean, Vietnamese, Portuguese. Yeah, so these are the top 5 languages that were requested more at our office. And all these numbers, especially statistic numbers, you cannot really just take it from just the way it looks. It actually has a lot to do with the demographic. Yes. Just for distribution and also their education background, or people who are maybe just visiting, or people who are it just all depends. It all depends. Yeah, it doesn't really just look the way it is.
I know it's hard. I'm trying to understand, for example, like the legal system. We have about 151,000 LEP people in the state of Hawaii, all the islands. It's about 11.1%. The court say that the order for the customer is about 11%. Try to validate this 600. I know it's numbers can be interpreted different times. So for every 10 cases, or lower cases, what cases, how many people would need to have interpretation services? Do they have 10%, 20%?
I don't know. Yeah, I would have to go back and, because we don't handle interpreter assignments, we have court operations staff that does that. I can go back and try to find you that number. You know what, let me grab my stat. I can tell you that, we provided, interpreters, how many cases provided in, which is based on actual cases. That is by request, that's how many times you have to send an interpreter to courthouse.
People go to the court or.
In 2024, fiscal year 2024, which is in June 30th, 2024, we provided interpreters in 8,400 proceedings at a cost of $535,562. So it's hard to,
8,400.
yeah,
8,400 proceedings, we need an interpreter.
statewide. Okay. And that's actually a little low. So, I mean, we've had in high years, it's been higher in some years. That I would have to go back and get for you. Yeah. I mean, I think to be fair, court is a very difficult situation for many people because many people come to court. It's not a happy place, right? So generally people are stressed out. They may be hauled into court involuntarily. They may not really want to be there. It may have a huge impact on their life. All kinds of things factor into play. And so we see that a lot of people come to court and lose their language. So we tend to err on the side of caution. So if anybody says, I need an interpreter, or they look like they need an interpreter, or the court is having a hard time understanding them, or whatever, we err on the side of offering the interpreter. So our numbers may be a little skewed high in terms of proportion. Like it may not just be like 11% of the population, of the court population, because we try to be more accessible. Yeah.
I don't know what our stat, but it's just a lot, you've all been interpreters for a long time, for 10 years or more. Just as a casual observance, do you see the demand growing?
I believe so, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is a viable profession going forward.
A couple years ago, there was an article in, I think it was US World and News and World Report, about how interpreting and translation was one of the top 10 fastest growing industries among all industries. And it's because, increasingly globalization, right? We are no longer are we the United States and we're stuck in our little silo. Everybody does business with somebody outside of the, speaks a different language or culture. So I think there's going to be even more demand for trained interpreters and trained translators to be able to bridge those gaps, not just in court or not just in medical, but also in business. For those people who don't really want to be dealing with people under stress, right? A lot of my colleagues do business interpreting, conference interpreting. One of my colleagues interpreted at the Olympics. I mean, that's kind of fun, right?
So Sue, I think I missed it. What was the fastest growing language you said?
I think on the island is Spanish.
Spanish, yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think so. On this island.
With Lahaina, I think.
Well, Lahaina was interesting because when the fires happened, all these people came out of the woodwork like ants that we had no idea lived there. And when the contract came out from FEMA saying, we need interpreters, they were mentioning languages like Korean and Japanese and all these. And I go, no, the Japanese houses burned, but they all speak English. One of them is my interpreter and she moved into Wailuku. So we don't need, there's only like 7 families that spoke Korean and they all moved and they were fine. And so it was the languages that they had no idea. They said, they said to me, well, what do you think the languages needs are? And I'm like, well, you've been there for like a month and you still don't know. So it was hard for them to really find out. So we really had to have meetings to find out who was working on the ground of what languages were the need. And Spanish and Ilocano was the number one need in Lahaina. And a lot of them were undocumented, yeah, but they still needed help. Yeah, along with Tongan and, and others, and Tagalog and other languages, but very interesting.
Right, so as far as the professional development piece, I saw it on the previous slide, as far as the code of ethics. Either within an organization or just personally, how have you advocated either to your employer or for yourself to make sure you keep your skills up? And just make it drive the point home like, hey, I need to improve my skills so I can continue to do this job, instead of them just your employer or yourself assuming, oh yeah, I can do this. Like, what did that ever look like for you?
I keep taking classes, on the internet, you know what I mean? I mean, what was that? Back in 2008, I actually took this community interpreting. They are from state of Maryland. So, it was a very good experience. And then, I mean, the test itself was really hard. I mean, I was able to pass, but I mean, you had to keep up with the current, the trend and then the terminology. I mean, I will pay for it and I will take the exam and I just keep up with that terminology and the knowledge, because otherwise, I'm gonna be behind, and then what am I gonna do when I'm interpreting and there's certain terminology that I don't know? For instance, I have this I was telling you about the high pregnancy department, right? And then once it become the pregnancy department, OBGYN, it's terminology, it gets like this. And then now I'm not a doctor, but they assume that I have to know about this DNA sequence. It's like, where am I gonna get this information? So I had to ask a girlfriend from Boston, and then she was actually lending me the book so I can study. I mean, what we use in interpretation, it's only the tip of the iceberg. However, all this rest of it, it's the study. You have to, because you would never know the language that you learn, you may use it in later on. So you constantly have to learn. I constantly does it. If I don't know some language that I mean, English that I don't know, I'll write it down. So I have it. It's a constant learning. So yeah.
And UCSF, we now, anyone we hire from, I think since 2013, a requirement to be hired as a medical interpreter, you have to have national certification. And you have to keep up with your certification, and it gets renewed every 4 years. And so what we did is that we set up an incentive that we will reimburse our interpreters for up to $1,000 to get their training. So to take courses, things like that. I mean, not every organization can do this, but I think most organizations have some way to help their employees keep up with their training, because that's important. Because you have to keep up with what's going on, right? And so at UCSF, this is what we're doing, is that we provide that reimbursement to our staff to take to get their credentials renewed, basically, right? And we also send them to the conference if they would like to go to the conference, the cheer conference I mentioned. We provide reimbursement for that too, because we want our staff to work at a optimal level, right? So
Yes.
and that's an incentive for them to continue to learn and offer those opportunities for courses. And once you're a medical interpreter, you kind of sign up for these listservs, and people say, okay, this class is happening, from CHIA or from other organizations, CCHI, right? Our national, one of the national certification boards, they have webinars that they put out. And so, I always send them to my staff and say, hey, there's some opportunities Some of them are free, actually. You know, I just said it.
Yes.
In Hawaii. Yeah. Yeah, and then there's all these like, places where you can learn new things, right? And so besides, self-learning, there's all these courses that are out there. Sometimes, again, some of them are free webinars. And sometimes they're mini ones, like 4 hours on a Saturday, and we get so many credits. Even though you're not there for credits, you can still learn a lot.
Sorry. No, it's also on this, yeah.
It's on this.
Good.
Appreciate reading up this question, but that's my question. Wait, there is no need for national certification, even states. So like you, I know you're very motivated, very passionate about your job, so you think about it. For like Alice and all your team, they need to speak, right, to continue for their employment. Right, so there is some incentive there, and they also get reimbursement. So how can we help folks here in Hawaii? That's not hard to know.
Yeah, I think that's a misunderstanding. Because in Hawaii, one thing, are you military, Brennan?
For my stuff, but.
Okay.
Yes, I asked that specifically because I deal with this. every day.
Right. So I think some employers, it's rare to have an employer hire you as an employee, except Bilingual Access Line, I think Helping Hands does hire as employees, but they're still part-time. Some maybe have more jobs than others. But for the most part, they're independent contractors. And that's why it's expected that you continue learning on your own. And like you guys done a lifetime of learning in order to be better and better and better. And actually, when you become an interpreter, you should have that attitude. I want to learn, whether I have to pay for it or not. I need to learn this stuff. And for example, in our organization, which is Language Services Hawaii, we have a differential in pay. So because of the independency of the contractor, we say, well, if you want higher pay, then get certified. And we constantly send out, this is how you get certified. And this is how they don't have your language to certify you. But now there's certain organizations that have a partial kind of certification. And so I think that knowledge is important, but yet we're a language service provider, so we should know that stuff in order to send it to the interpreters. But now there's an organization that has kind of been refreshed called the Hawaii Interpreters and Translators Association, HITA. Some of you might have come to some of the seminars or the webinars that they've had. Every few months, they have a webinar on different topics. I think last month it was they got someone to speak on becoming a professional video interpreter and remote interpreter over the phone. And before that, they had another topic or whatever. But on the website, on the HITA website, it's called HITA, Hawaii Interpreters and Translators Association, we put out notices of all of these paid and free conferences, webinars. A lot of the webinars are like 3 a.m. Hawaii time, so it's hard to go. But some of them are not, but yet that's a great place. That website is a really good place to go, and you can join them. And even sometimes there's jobs that come along, but if you join them, it's like $20 a year. It's really cheap, but that's where we're trying to make the information be able to go to anyone who wants to get that information. So the Hawaii Interpreters and Translators Association.
And I think their website is HI.
It's actually called
Translators.
No, it's hawaiitranslators.org. hawaiitranslators.org.
So maybe this is where I can insert, a vision that we have here at Kapi'olani Community College. And, we have the backing of our chancellor, is that we would really like to become a nexus for community interpretive training. So we do have some funding whereby we're ready to develop a train-the-trainer program so we can increase the capacity of how many trainers, are out there who can do that. And we're going to call on all of you to help us with that. We've been providing free training because of grant support that we've had. Where Sue started a class last night for us, that's going on, and we're going to have another class in July. But according to the beginning, is going to be offered at no charge. And we keep looking at this funding, but then eventually we hope that, there'll be a program that leads into a higher level, possibly even a degree or a
certification.
Yeah, so then, it's covered by other types of funding. So stay tuned, and one of our goals too is in talking with Department of Health, is that, should there be a state certification? Should we bring in national certification or whatever, so those dialogues are happening. Right now.
I have a question. So with that, when that comes online, would that be distributed out through Office of Language Access to the language access coordinators, or?
Yeah,
would it come
we'll
through?
continue working with OLA. We have our partners at UHBO, National Resource Centers. We're working with the city and county. I mean, we've got a lot of partners, who can help us get there.
Is the free classes that are happening now or in July, are they only for feline classes or are they? So
No, they're open to continue.
where do you find that information?
This and for the current classes, who's teaching, or reaching out to the community.
Bonus.
That Helping Hands, Pacific Gateway, students people,
Our own market.
Valley people, I mean. We're just getting, hitting the ground running, but, we're gonna have more of this, and it'll be expensive.
Believe me, there is a demand.
Certification process is here as well.
So we put announcements out in the university.
And the HITA website should have that as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise. Do have a second part for you guys, but how about we do an activity? We've been sitting around for a little bit, haven't we? Yeah. And so, hopefully this is gonna be fun. We're gonna work on our memory skills. So it doesn't matter if you don't speak another language, it's nothing to do with that. This is a little fun game. We're all gonna stand up. Hope this works. All right, so kind of like a telephone, right? We're gonna pass this ball around. So I'm gonna start off. I'm gonna say, I went to the doctor because I was feeling unwell, okay? And then let's say I pass the ball to Chuchi. Chuchi's gonna say, I went to the doctor because I was feeling unwell, and so you're gonna add something else to it, and you're gonna pass the ball to someone else. So you have to start with the first part of the sentence, and we're gonna keep adding on. Well, let's see how well we have to do.
It's gonna be the last, right?
Maybe we can come a little bit closer, a little bit closer. Okay.
Make it go.
Hey, that's a good thing, right? No taking is part of the show. Okay. Okay, let's see how long we'll play.
Physics.
Okay, so
Go to
I went to the doctor because I was feeling unwell. Oh, you have to say the whole thing.
I went to the doctor because I was feeling unwell.
I stayed home.
And stay home. Stay
I
home.
went to the doctor because I was feeling unwell, I stayed home and drank 8 cups of water.
I went to the doctor because I was feeling unwell and stayed home and drank 8 cups of water.
And what else?
And I took a nap.
Oh.
How did it exist?
So I was really unwell and I drank 8 cups of water and I took a nap. Oh, sorry, I got it. And I ate lots of candy afterwards.
I went to the doctor because I was feeling unwell. I stayed home, had 8 cups of water, took a nap, had a lot of candy, and then I regretted it.
I went to the doctor because I was feeling unwell. I stayed home. I drank 8 cups of water. I took a nap. and I had a lot of candy, and I regretted it, and I ate more. I went to the doctor because I was feeling unwell, so I stayed home. I drank 8 cups of water. And then I took a nap, and then I ate a lot of candy. I regretted it. But I ate some more. Then I regretted it more.
I went to the doctor because I was really unwell, and I stayed home, and I had 8 cups of water, and I took a nap, and then I ate a bunch of candy, and I regretted it, and then I ate more candy, and then I regretted it back. And then it turns out I had COVID.
Went to the doctor because I was really unwell. I stayed home, 8 cups of water, took a nap. I had a lot of candy. I regretted it, and I had some more, and I regretted it, and I had. And it turns out I had COVID, and so. I went back to the doctor again.
Enough for me?
Yes.
Thanks a lot. Okay. Oh, okay, so I took, whatever, I went to the doctor because I was feeling unwell. And then I went home, or I stayed home. And then I had 8 cups of water, took a nap, woke up for the nap, but I ate a bunch of candy. I regretted it. Then I ate some more candy and I regretted it even more. And then it was her turn, right? And then I found out I had COVID. Is that right? And then I wasn't listening, but I forgot what I wasn't listening. Oh, and then I went back to the doctor. Oh, and then went back to the doctor. And he said, "Oh my God, you've got COVID. Why did you come here? Go back home." What are you guys?
What have you guys?
I can try. I went to the doctor because I was feeling unwell. I stayed home. And I drank 8 cups of water, took a nap, and then ate a lot of candy. And I regretted it, and then ate some more candy, and I regretted it, and then I found out I had COVID, and then I went back to the doctor, and then the doctor said, "Why? Oh my God, why did you come here? You should go home." I stayed home and did a test. And then I sleep.
So this is the point of exercise.
Oh no, what happens at this point of the
That's
exercise?
the point is that we can't.
Okay.
So much.
We can sit down?
Yeah.
You can sit down?
I said,
Right, so. You can all know, the interpreter needs a lot of different skills, right? A lot of different skills. And we wear a lot of different hats, right? And so interpreting is just not just what you see on the surface of what we do. And so I've heard this many years ago, I'm gonna share it with all of you. Is that we may look very calm on the surface, like ducks swimming in water, but underneath, we are paddling like crazy as interpreters, trying to remember all these things we need to remember, right? Visual cues, cultural awareness, and making sure we do advocacy. Is everybody understanding each other? There's all these things that go through our brain. So we are really just like us. We look very calm on the surface, but actually underneath, we are very much going crazy. And so everybody take a deck to remember. And then this is what happened. This is our job. We're like that. We are calm. We look so calm. Actually, we are not very confident. I mean, we need to do our job.
That's a cute one. I get this one, I get this one, and that's great. This is cute too.
Think that's next question.
Yeah.
So, it's like, oh. Yeah.
We are all just swimming on the second. Looking hot.
Can I ask a question? So back earlier, do you have a slide that has all sorts of things that the interpreters have to do, or the last one was efficacy?
Advocacy, yes.
Can you explain a little bit?
So I think I mentioned a little bit that we don't usually do that too much because we want the patient to advocate for themselves. Right, because if they don't understand something, they should say it and we'll interpret it, and then the doctor will, will answer those questions, right? But there are points where you see the conversation is not going well, right? There's some sort of understanding that's not happening, and that's when you need to advocate and say, interpreter would like to pause conversation and, and say what you need to say. But remember, everything that is said in the room needs to interpret it. So you have to tell both sides of the party, hey, I'm interpreter stopping the conversation, both languages, right? And explain what you're asking or what you're explaining in both languages. And so we try to minimize the advocacy piece because again, we want our interpreters, we want the patients to advocate for themselves. Right? So be equitable, they should be asking questions as if they're not, quote unquote, if they're not there, right? They're just speaking with the patient, to the doctor, the nurse directly, right? Or the social worker, happens in the hospital too. So, but there are points where you're like, this conversation is not going well. And that's when you step in. And you advocate for that patient. Yeah, sure. All right. So earlier, I think Yuka was mentioning that, as a lot, right? You take on a lot of things as an interpreter. You see a lot of good things, a lot of not so good things, right? And so self-care is one of the very important things that we do for ourselves. Even if we're not interpreters, I think self-care is important. Now, for interpreters, we have something called vicarious trauma. Anybody heard of that? Vicarious trauma? Yes, you have? Oh, vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma. Anybody heard of that? No? Okay, no worries. So vicarious trauma. Why does this happen? Well, as interpreters, we speak in the first person, right? When you interpret, you're like, the patient says, I'm not feeling well, like we just said, I'm not feeling well. So what does the interpreter say? I'm not feeling well. I'm not feeling well. The interpreter doesn't say, oh, she says she's not feeling well, right? Because when you do that, you're gonna get confused at some point, right? And so we also tell the doctor, please speak directly to the patient, or the patient, please speak directly to the doctor. So using I statements, right? So when you do that, you kind of take on that feeling or that emotions of that patient, right? If it's something very traumatic, you kind of take that on and you don't realize it, right? Like, let's say, doctor says you have cancer, telling diagnosis, right? And the patient's asking questions, and those questions pertains to the diagnosis. You kind of become that patient yourself in a way. You kind of take on that role, and it's unconscious, but
you keep saying, I have this, I have that, I don't feel well, then that is vicarious treatment. There's worst cases, right? If it's a rape case, right? Then you are interpreting for a patient, a rape victim. Imagine you have to say, I was raped, right? So unconsciously, you take on this load and we call it vicarious treatment. A lot of the medical interpreters have that. I'm sure social services and coordinating of court will have that too. And so we have to learn, how do we take care of ourselves, right? Because you don't realize it as you're interpreting in that session, but when you walk out that door, your mind is starting to process what you just talked about, right? And it becomes very stressful for us as an interpreter. Yes.
So that's very serious.
Yes.
So I would like to know, among medical interpreter community, is there like a checklist to, make sure you're good? Either before or after a session, like if you're experiencing those symptoms, and is there some sort of recommended care, like counselors who would have within the community?
Good question, yeah.
Help deal with that.
Yeah, so good question. So there's not a checklist per se. Something that's related is that if possible, we always request for we call it a pre-session in our field, meaning before I walk into a room with the patient and what's going on, we ask the care team, hey, can you tell me what's going on before I walk in? That's very important because it prepares ourselves mentally, right? In the past, if you think about it in a medical setting, there is a care team and they do talk about, hey, we're gonna see this patient, the doctors, the nurses, the social worker. They're all in a conversation together. But even to this moment, the interpreters are the last to know, right? Because we're still kind of a second thought. Yeah, I saw in the medical record, they need a Cantonese interpreter. And they just request us. Sometimes they still don't prepare that there is a need for an interpreter. And so you come in and they're all prepared already to walk into the room and talk to this patient about maybe it's the end of life, right? But you're not prepared because you just arrived, right? And so nowadays, we as interpreters, we try to advocate for ourselves and say, hey, before I walk in, can you at least give me a minute of summary of what we're gonna do, right? Or what you're gonna talk about, because that helps you prepare mentally, and also the terminology you might be, right? You're kind of grabbing from your brain what the terminology I might be for this encounter. And so that's one thing that helps. But the other is we have spiritual care at the hospital, and spiritual care is non-denomination. So we partner with them a lot. They also help out our staff, or anyone as an employee at CSF. So if it's we always check in with our interpreters, and we set up sessions for a debrief with the spiritual care, so that they can talk about the experiences they have, especially if it's like a patient that's been there for a long term, and maybe they passed, unfortunately, and it's very traumatic, right? You work with this patient for such a long period of time, and the outcome wasn't good. And it's not just one interpreter, it might be a group of interpreters who've been working with this patient. And so we set up debriefs with spiritual care to kind of help them through, talking it through, and making sure that they do this self-care. And self-care is also, making sure that it's also about rest, right? Getting good rest, getting hydrated. Like people says, you need stamina for these things. Sometimes it's an hour or two of a family meeting. You need to have that stamina. So part of it is, and also, being open as a manager, being open and say, hey, do you need, my door is always open. If you need support, we're there. So, because I'm an interpreter too, so I know that, these things come. I know, Joan, you have a question.
It's just wrong, and it's thinking about the same piece of mental load. For example, in medical care setting in a large hospital, you have some large specialization, college, orthopedics, endocrinology, right? But as an interpreter, because they're not many, right? So you get called from one appointment in oncology, and now you're P. Now you're in orthopedics, but at least you get a schedule of like this week, these are the specialties I'm going into. Not at all, because of the nurse, it would be cardiac, right?
Right, exactly. So, I'm glad you brought this up. I was talking to, I think, Angie earlier, that
someone else earlier that as interpreters, we don't specialize in just one, a medical interpreter, we don't specialize in just one specialty, right? I see you shaking your head, we don't, right? We go everywhere. And so unlike a doctor who's maybe a cardiologist, right, or in diabetes, they specialize and they know all the terms inside out, right? Everything about that specialty. But as an interpreter, we're, like you say, we're going to peds, to adult, to diabetes, rheumatology, everything. So we have to have a very vast and basic knowledge of all these terminology. And then, you know, we might look into some new terms a little bit more because new things happen, right? So we're not walking dictionaries, but we need to know all those terms in order to go to all these specialties.
But in terms of like mental load, right?
Mhm.
Self-care, because you don't have a schedule, say this month, these are my
Yeah.
areas, right?
Yeah.
How do you manage that day? Like you're doing end of life care interpretation.
That's why the pre-session is so important, right? Knowing what's going to happen. We don't have a preset schedule. Okay, Alice, you're gonna be going to all rheumatology this week or all of this. We go everywhere, right? And so even though we don't have a set schedule, every day we can see on a list of what of all the appointments that's happening and the ones we're going to take. So I'll show you what that looks like in a bit. But so I think you kind of get into rhythm of it. But for the self-care piece is, you know, keeping healthy is important, right? Because stamina, you need to have that stamina to interpret. It takes a load on your mind. When you leave that appointment and you talk about something that's very stressful, it takes a load on your mind and actually on your physical body. You feel physically taxing, even though you did no exercise, you just sat there and interpret. You feel like that on your shoulders. At least I do. I should say from my perspective, I feel it, right? And so, you know, we need to, you know, do exercise. We need to keep ourselves healthy. Drink that 8 cups of water, you know, keep hydrated. So I feel like we're talking so much, like I'm talking so much right now, right? Keep hydrated, right? And also like, remember to do the things you love outside of work. Remember that. Do the hobbies you love. I love to cook. Joe knows that. I love to bake, you know, and so like do those things to keep yourself, you know, don't focus so much on, oh my gosh, I just interpreted for this, you know, very difficult thing. Yes, you should focus on it, but also say, you know what, I leave this at work. And then you go home, I do the things that I love, right? That's part of self-care, right? To remember to do things you love. And you know, work is only a very small part of our life, right? Even though we spend 8 hours there, usually, but it's, you know, we have other parts of our lives that we need to pay attention to, right? And so one of it is really to take care of ourselves. So a few things that I like to do, I guess I like to bake. So, you know, baking, it gives you some control, right? All these ingredients you gotta put in, all these things. But other things, simple things, going for a walk, right? One thing that I like to do, this might sound funny, I like to do facial masks. So without contacts, I cannot see very well at all. You would be all blurry dots. But what does doing a facial mask have to do with this? I have to take out my glasses. I usually when I get home, I take out my contacts. I have to take out my glasses. I have to put on that mask and I can't see anything, right? So I close my eyes because playing on the phone is not going to help me. I'll be like this, right? So it gives you a chance to just unplug and take that time for yourself, right? It's simple. It's just a mask. It's just a facial mask. But for me, it's a way to remind myself to kind of unplug and just focus on myself. Some other things I've learned to do is tapping. Have you heard of that? A tapping exercise, yeah. So there's apps for this where you hear someone talk, okay, you tap here, and you think about these different things that, you know, like just focus on the part that you're tapping. And so it just focuses on your body and it helps you relax. It helps your stress levels to come down. So we've told this to our interpreters as well, like after you come out from a very stressful, you know, encounter, do a tapping. Something to, you know, or just take a deep breath, you know, do some breathing exercise to calm yourself down a little bit, right? So it may sound very simple, but if you sit down and do it for a few seconds or like a minute or two, you actually feel yourself calm down a little bit.
usually it's best if you have both feet on the ground and you're sitting. And you just take that deep breath in. Yeah, right. So one thing that one of the chaplains taught us is you close your eyes and you visualize like a wave coming as you're taking your breath, and then as it comes back down, you exhale. That's one thing, right? So a visualization, right? So any other, actually, I want to hear from the interpreters. What kind of tips what kind of things you guys do for self-care?
A hobby, something you like to do, it's just simple, but you can take your mind off. It's gonna, eventually, if you don't do that, it's gonna eat your way. Or, have a little bit of exercise, like you really have to take care of yourself. Otherwise, you're gonna bury under the stress and, you know what I mean? Next thing is like, it's fine, no, that's okay, you know what I mean? You will ask yourself, because I've been there, believe me. So, have some little simple hobby, like you said, cooking is so good. I got an into tropical plants. You know what I mean? Plants. I just talk to them, they don't talk me back, but that's okay. I mean, they're very cooperative. Ain't them that way, so. And they have a sense of humor.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing your guts. Even though we have this vicarious trauma, to be honest, when I first started, I would go home and cry. I did. I went home and cried. And because it's hard, you hear this thing happening to a patient, and and for young patients too, sometimes it's hard. And those stories stay with you too. But then I tell myself, well, Alice, imagine it was no interpreter there. What would happen to that patient, right? Would they have understood what was happening with their health? Would they make the right, informed decisions, right? Maybe not. And so then I tell myself, okay, yes, it was tough, but at least they know what's happening and they can make the right choices for themselves. And that you were the one who was able to help them do that. So a little pep talk for myself. But for sure, when I first started, I'm not gonna lie, it was hard. It's very hard, and you can cry. And I mean, it's nice to have a good cry, but it's not healthy either to do it all the time. So yeah, self-care is definitely one of the things that's important. Right.
Also,
Yes, yes.
So sometimes in some doctor's offices, doctor prefer you use a third person,
Really?
Yeah, some doctors.
That's hard because then you get confused though.
No.
Third person.
No, they know that, it's the third person that's giving. So doctor will prefer that you say he feels this way, he feels that way. Some doctors prefer that.
I've not heard of that, but it gets confusing after a while though, Like as an interpreter and also as
The doctor doesn't want the interpreter to say I, because he would think that, it's the interpreter doesn't feel well. So to certain doctors, they prefer that you use the third person to talk about the patient.
Okay. It's the first I've heard of that. But I think it's about knowing how to work with an interpreter, right? I think that's part of it. To kind of give a little bit of mini lesson on how you work with interpreters and best practices. Because at some point it's going to be confusing for yourself and for the doctor, even for the patient. And so it's best to stick with those best practices that you use. I feel this way. Yeah, okay, thank you for sharing that. I didn't realize.
So doctors don't want to confuse themselves.
Yeah.
With two different people here, and then you're saying I, she's saying I.
Yeah, I think it's about training. It's about learning how to work with an interpreter. Yeah, for the right.
It's a challenge.
And in Hawaii, we're less.
In training or professionalizing.
Yeah.
Standard like saying our best friend. The
Mhm.
practice that I also did is high.
You're right.
It's
Right.
like doctor, and it's training the doctors.
Yes.
And I think
we're still having a lot of work there. This training just needed.
Right.
Why that's important.
Right,
And
exactly.
that's the point, why is that?
Yeah, yeah.
When does it end?
Right, that's true, because, we have to, UCSFI, we have to do in-services constantly, right? With our providers and our new nurses and residents and tell them, hey, this is how you work with an interpreter, right? So there has to be some education somewhere that gets to providers and nurses, right? How to work with us. Yes.
And as far as like best practices, so I mentioned with the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, and where we have not had a huge disaster, thankfully, but I would like to know more about interpreting and emergency. What does that look like to an interpreter maintaining their composure? Because that's the closest I think I could provide any volunteers or any of our National Guard members training to prepare for something that hopefully doesn't happen, but if it happens, that's the type of environment I imagine. So what would that, what that would look
Yes,
like for?
so emergency rooms, we have definitely, definitely been to emergency room a few times, more than a few times at UCSF. It is very chaotic, very chaotic. And you really, this is where your visual cues actually kick in a lot. Because you have to make sure who is in the room and who am I interpreting for. Sometimes it's actually not for the patient. So in the emergency room, at least at UCSF, we have room 1, 2, and 3. Anytime you hear 1, 2, and 3, those are major. Some sort of traumatic event happened, a car accident or something. It could be cardiac arrest, it could be a stroke. Every time you hear those rooms, there are going to be a lot of people there. And so then when you walk in, you have to first look for who's the charge nurse. Who's the person I'm contacting to make sure, because the patient's probably on the bed, on the table. You're not talking to them. They're out. But you might be talking to their family, right? You might actually interpret for the family to get a story, what happened to the patient, right? And so that's where either a provider, sometimes a med student or a resident will come and they will talk to you with the family, and you get that story. What is this story? What happened to this patient? And sometimes you have to stand there for a while because you're waiting for the provider to come, right? And you just have to look around and see, make sure, are they asking the patient a question? Maybe the patient is subconscious, and you have to say, hey, I'm the interpreter. You have to make yourself known, and that you are all the time, because there's new people coming in, right, to help this patient. And so you have to make yourself known. And have to make sure, okay, looking around, okay, I think they're trying to ask the patient, where it hurts or something, right? So you have to be right there and insert yourself and say, hey, I'm an interpreter, I can interpret for what you're asking. It gets very chaotic, and you actually also have to not be in the way, right? So there's a lot going on. And most of the time you're actually interpreting for the patient's family to get the story, what happened to them. And then there's long stretches of wait. Unfortunately, I see you nodding, right? Long stretches of wait. Because if it's a stroke, they might have to take them to the CT, right? To make sure that there's a window of time for stroke, right? To get care. And so there's a lot of waiting as well. But if you're in either room 1, 2, or 3, it's going to be very chaotic and very busy. And you just have to be aware of what's happening and make sure you have someone to contact and say, hey, do you need me right now? Am I in the way? What can I do? Right. So there's so it's a little bit different when you're in the ER than you are in an outpatient clinic or in the hospital. Yeah. So you guys talk about it. But it's hard to pinpoint exactly what to do. It's really you have to be very aware and alert of what's happening in it. Yeah. All right. So now you're talking about the ER, right? So let's talk about what it is that work. So UCSF Health. This is where I work in San Francisco. The University of California San Francisco Health Medical Center. So we have the interpreting and translation services. We service in San Francisco, Oakland, the Peninsula, which is
between, I guess, San Francisco and San Jose, you know where that is, and other satellite locations. We do in-person interpreting, video interpreting, and also phone. We have in-house staff interpreters. So we have Cantonese and Mandarin. I put a slash because all of our Chinese interpreters speak both Cantonese and Mandarin. And luckily, we have one of the Chinese interpreters who also speak Vietnamese. It's a language that's definitely trending and coming up in San Francisco, California. We also have another Chinese interpreter who speaks Toishanese. Anybody know Toishanese?
Heard of that.
You heard of it, right? Yeah. Taishan. So it is a dialect. So when I first started, I was shadowing my mentor. We walked into a room. It was for diabetes. The patient is a very, older lady. She had a scratch on her foot. And this isn't diabetes. When you get injured in diabetes, this could be serious, right? And so turns out this patient spoke Toishanese. My mentor speaks Cantonese, and so do I, and I speak Mandarin. But this patient doesn't speak that. And so we're like, oh my goodness. And this is how it was very hard to find Toishanese interpreters, this specific dialect. But it's very prevalent in the Bay Area, this dialect. And so we're trying to understand, what is she saying about her scratch? And all I could think about, I feel like there's marbles in her, like she's talking with marbles in her mouth. Because it was very like, that's what it sounded like to me. Like, but I kind of get what she's saying, but not. And so figured it out, she was saying that a chicken has scratched her foot. And that's why, she's injured. But it took us a long time to figure out what she's saying. And even though, Toishanese is very common, a lot of people speak that in the Bay Area in San Francisco, to find interpreters for it, it's very difficult. Now it's a little bit more, and I'm so glad we now have a staff interpreter who actually speaks Toishanese. And so we have about 43 interpreters total. 6 are the Chinese interpreters, and the rest are Spanish. Spanish is I think is huge, a huge demand in California. 1 in 5 speaks another language, and it's probably Vietnamese. So it's a big population. We also partner with language service providers for spoken languages and sign language, because we only have 43 people, and there's a lot of patients to help. So we have to partner with, vendors, basically, or agencies to help us. Just a quick stats. So 10% of UCSF patients are patients with LEP, it's about 10%. There's 350,000 plus visits at UCSF that are for scheduled visits for patients with LEP. Scheduled meaning that it's
calendar.
Yeah, it's in the medical record system. But so this doesn't include like inpatient. Inpatient's kind of prompted. There's no scheduling. They just ask, hey, we need you at the 15th floor at the hospital for patients. And usually it's the same day. Those are not counted in this number, but so there's a lot of patients we see. And that's why 43 of us is not going to get added. That's why we have to partner with language service providers, agencies to help us with this. So a lot actually goes to video. And then we also do translations. What are translations, Leanne? What is it? Written. Yay. Okay, good. And we have about 1,800 annually, but it doesn't look big, but each project is about probably 6 languages. One to 6 languages, average 3 languages. So you have like many pages, right? It's a big project. So you think about it that way, it's quite a lot.
And how
And then
long every project is?
it could vary. It could be a booklet. It could be a page for a patient, like a patient information. It could be a patient letter.
Or brochure.
A brochure, or like signage. We do signage as well. So it could be all kinds of projects, but it could be in one project could have many languages. And so how do we figure out like 350K, that many visits? How do you handle all of that? Like I said, we have video, we have phone, and we have in person, and we have a sliding, kind of like a scale to figure out
what kind of appointments would fit which type of encounter? Now, this is not a one size fit all, right? It also depends on the patient's condition. Simple things, simple meaning like maybe intake, billing services, check-in, check-out of an appointment, follow-up calls. It could be done over phone. That might be okay. Now, but if the patient is hard of hearing, that's not okay, right? So then we have to skip over, you have to go over, okay, well, then do we do video call or do it in person? So different types of encounters might, suit, different modalities might suit them better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So like for, family meetings or end of life care, definitely we're gonna be in the in-person, interpreter, right? Because it's very emotional and having a video is very cool. But of course, there's exceptions, especially if that language is hard to find. Then, there are languages where we call, actually, I think so. So this is the pyramid that we came up with, right? So we have languages that are threshold, which is, a little more common. You can find it, it's easier, like Spanish, Cantonese, Mandarin, Russian. And there is something on languages of lesser demand. So there may be more education opportunities to learn that language. So maybe there's more language interpreters in that in here. And these are some examples, right? And then we have languages of lesser diffusion, which is where languages are usually indigenous languages, or maybe here's the Pacific Island languages, right? You don't have that many interpreters in those languages. For us in California, in the Bay Area, it's indigenous language like Zapotec or Mom. There are languages from South America. And so there are a big population of them, but not enough interpreters, right? And so those are languages of lesser diffusion. And so sometimes these interpreters are hard to find. They're actually from out of state. So we don't have it in person. So we have to use the phone or the video. So there are exceptions. It really depends on the languages that's being used. Earlier, Joan was asking, wait, do you know what do I have a schedule of all the encounters, right? So at UCSF, we have something called a dispatching system. Think of it as an Uber. You put in a request, the request gets sent to us, and an interpreter would set that request. And it's always the top of the list. And here, I can share this with you because there's no patient information on it. Or else I cannot share this with you at all. So this tells me that this is for video, right? And someone arrived, one of our interpreters arrived, Omar arrived, and it tells you what time they arrived, right? Or Mateo arrived at this time for this video interpreter.
Is it like a dispatching app?
It's not quite an app. It's a web-based. But this is what our providers see. So if they want to know, hey, is my interpreter coming? Are they here yet? They can see it here. So someone accepted this job, right? Wei Jun, Rachel, she accepted this at this location for Cantonese for neurology. And so the providers can see who accepted it, when they arrived, and when they completed it. So earlier I might have mentioned that we have a hard stop. You have to document that you worked with an interpreter. So this is important because you can see, let's say you forgot, oh, who was that interpreter who just helped me? Like 2 hours ago, and you need to document it. You don't remember, you can come here and you can see, oh yeah, it was Rachel who helped me with this. Why do we need documentation? Because Joint Commission will ask for it. I think we answered these questions earlier with Yuka and Melody, so I'm gonna skip over. So I know we're at limited time. PAC certification, let's go over this really quick. So like I said, I know about the national certification because that's what we require at UCSF. So we have the national certification, we have CCHI, National Certification Commission for Healthcare Interpreters, and also National Board of Certification for Medical Interpreters. And then I'll talk about this as well. So CCHI, there's 3 exams that they have nationally. Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic is their CHI certification. We have something for core and core CHIP. So core CHI is for all languages that are not those. And but it's not the oral test though, it's the test for your ethics and your interpretive skills. If you pass this, it means that you understand the standards and ethics of an interpreter. And it still qualifies as a national certification. I held this one for a long time because I'm a Cantonese interpreter. And so I had this for a long time. And then I think 2 years ago, they started with core CHIP, which P stands for performance. And so now this is good for all languages. Why? Because with this new certification, it took them like, I think 6 or 7 years to actually do their research on how to develop this certification. So for this one, it's actually, they test your interpreting skills in English. So they call it E2E, English to English. You might think, why? I speak Cantonese, why would how does this help? Well, they realized that if you take the test in like the interpreting skills test in English, it actually tells them how good you are in your interpreting skills. Why? Because they ask you to do some kind of summarizing, paraphrasing, all these things that you kind of learn as an interpreter, but you're not interpreting it into your target language, right? So you have to think. One part of the test was substitute this word. So migraine, the word migraine, is usually just a very heavy. Usually when I think migraine, I can tell you what it is right away in Cantonese or in Mandarin. But if you have to think about how to explain this in English, what is a migraine? It's a severe headache, right? So how do you substitute? You have to know how to substitute these words. Right? So if you have a good command of your English skills, you know how to do this. But it also helps you to understand for them to understand your language skills. And at the end, there is a part for your language. Like for me, it was Cantonese, right? So there is a part at the end. So that is their newest test came out. This core CHI, they're actually going to sunset that test because now that they have this one, then they're gonna sunset this test in 2027. And so all certifications renew every 4 years. And it is and they're also certified, their certifications are accredited. The other one is the NBCMI, and they have more certification for different languages. But it's their testing is from a third party that they utilize. It's still valid. It's also a national certification. And you also have something similar to the core CHI, right? If you're non-language based assessment, meaning the oral exam is not in your language, but you can still test for the written part of it, right? Your ethics and your standards. And it's every 4 years. They I think I'm thinking every 5 for this one, every 4 years. And the reason why I want to talk about Alta language testing is because it's not for interpreting, but if ever, Hawaii, I'm not sure if you have this called dual role. So let's say you're an NP, a nurse practitioner, and you're also a medical interpreter. That's a dual role. But this one is about having your NP speak directly with your patient without a need of an interpreter. So at UCSF, we do have this, we certify our providers and our nurses if they do speak a second language. And we use this test to certify whether they can perform their duties as a nurse or a doctor using their language skills. It doesn't mean they don't have interpreters work with them. It's, maybe in their normal routine encounters, they don't need to work with interpreters, but maybe for something more emotional, more complex, they can still, request us to come and assist. All right, good. Quiz time. I think you guys are gonna pass this flying colors. Interpreters, what do interpreters do? Yay! And then a translator? Yay! All right. And a doctor uses a scalpel, and what else? Yay! If you don't remember anything I talked about today, please remember this. And knowing is half the battle. Have you heard of this?
Yes.
It dates me, but you know, G.I. Joe. Right? Okay, so do it anyway. Again, I think as medical interpreter or community interpreters, you know, even if everything doesn't work out regarding the relationship, whatever it is, I think our duty is to help our community, right? And so I think these are called the paradoxical commandments. I'm not sure if you've heard of them, but they're actually written by someone who actually is from, well, who went to school here at Hawaii. His name is Kent M. Keith. Not sure if you've heard of him, but I think what he wrote is, it resonated with me when I read it as an interpreter, and I hope it resonates with you too. And whatever you do, no matter if it's an interpreter or any other job, so do it anyway. So I'm gonna try to read and not be emotional, but there are 10 of them. People are illogical, unreasonable, and self-centered. Love them anyway. If you do good, people will accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Do good anyway. If you're successful, you win false friends and true enemies. Succeed anyway. The good you do today, be forgotten tomorrow. Happens to us as interpreters. But do good anyway. Honesty and frankness make you vulnerable, but be honest and frank anyway. The biggest men and women with the biggest ideas can be shot down by the smallest men and women with the smallest minds, but think big anyway. People favor the underdogs, but only follow top dogs. Fight for a few underdogs anyway. What you spend years building may be destroyed overnight. Build anyway. People really need help, but may attack you if you do help them. Help people anyway. Give the world the best you have, and you get kicked in the teeth. Give the world the best you have. So, for the very last thing I would love everyone to do is you're going to motivate yourself. How are we going to do that? Think about whatever you take away from today. However you think, you know, your journey, maybe it's medical interpreting, maybe it's not. Maybe it's community interpreting, right? Some other field. But how do you motivate yourself? What do you want to say to yourself? I'm going to do A, B, and C, right? To continue this exploration or this journey. What is it going to be? Well, you're going to write yourself a postcards. Do you guys remember how to do postcards? Do you know what postcards are anymore? Right? Where do you put our address? We put our address here. In these little lines here. And this is where you write what you're going to write to yourself. You're going to write to yourself. And I will send it back to you in the summer. So you remember, oh yeah, I told myself I was going to do that. Did I do it? Or maybe later, maybe my dream might change. Right? But for me, it's a new thing. That's a beautiful thing.
Can I ask you one thing real quick, sorry. You have these on your table? Please give a screenshot to that. It takes a while for it to download because the connection here is not very good. So while you write your postcard, it'll load, and we'd really appreciate it if you could just give us, it's 3 questions for the survey. I just need to get a head count, like how many people were here, what you took away, what worked, what didn't, so we can make these better in the future. Really appreciate it. While you write postcard, you can wait, let this load.
Is it?
No.
No, okay.
That's.
Okay.